Karma, 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 chameleon. Are we live?
I don't know what we are. I'm not live. It doesn't look like it's live.
There's usually a bit of a delay, so
Oh,
let's look over
lame.
here. Why
Okay.
don't you start? Jeez Louise, dude. Okay. Okay, there we go. We're live.
We're live. Yay.
And there's a bunch of us. There's a bunch of noise of us asking if we're live or not. How you doing, James Lindsay?
I am. I'm all right. How are you?
I'm pretty good. We're having a snow day. It's expected about 6 to 10 inches where I am over the next couple days. So,
That wow. I didn't know it was allowed to snow there.
well, people don't really adapt to it well. So I've decided to take a snow day because, well, I don't want to put on chains, and I don't want to deal with Olympia traffic.
I can understand that completely. We had some snow the other day, but it has melted and we are having a very warm rain day today.
Warm rain. Do you get? How often does it snow? What's your like your bottom out temperature of the year? Is it pretty chilly in your terrain?
Um, it can get cold. It can get really cold. It can drop as low as I don't know. I like your hat. No, I don't actually. It
You
can get
don't?
down to well below freezing. I mean, when we had those polar vortices, it went almost to zero. That was cold. It usually drops into the 20s
Oh,
in
jeez.
January and February here and there, but for the most part, it stays not too bad. It's like in the 60s today. It's
Hmm.
and rainy,
And
rain. It is
are you like
mud
in
season.
super humid summer place with the cicadas and the
Oh yeah,
yeah,
total cicada zone.
yeah.
I'm trying to actually move this stupid window. I can't handle this delay, so I'm covering our YouTube window, but not
Yeah.
the chat with our
Okay.
Skype window. Now I'm
So
happy.
James can see the chat, and so can I. So we will, I guess, intermittently speak to the chat, make sure that they
Yeah,
can hear us. Yeah.
yeah.
So what's on
These
the plate
gimmicky
today? What?
sunglasses are going to have to go though. They're really actually uncomfortable.
Okay. Well, this hat is probably going to tick off more people than it tickles. So I'll
See,
have
I
to.
got the hat for the shameless product plug, right? Or sorry, not the hat. The sunglasses. They're an heirloom of my house now. That's the point. Is that they're an heirloom of my house, but they're actually too small for me, and they're crushing my face.
You can't
So
bend them. Okay. No fun.
I mean, I could, but they're an heirloom of my house. You don't bend heirlooms of your house.
Why don't you?
I don't know. They cost like $18. I could buy more.
You could with all that crazy new discourses money.
Oh,
You're
there's
making in.
$5. You never know. I got my saber behind me too. Some
It
people know.
is, yeah. I have a mock sword in the other room, but I didn't bring it. I have a ginger ale
It is
and
424 here, penetration or whatever.
it's 124 here.
Damn, you starting early, man.
No, this is a ginger ale.
Oh, okay. I got coffee because it's afternoon. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so are we ready to kill people? I mean, talk the truth about
Community love.
things.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things going on. There's this really interesting spatter of culture this week. One person got fired, I guess it was a while ago, from the New York Times
Not
for
enough people
the
got fired, in my opinion. I'm not joking. I'm really dead serious.
okay. For what? Fired for what? Because one person at the New York Times was fired for saying in scare quotes the accursed N word.
Yeah, that person should not have been fired. That
Yeah.
person should have their job. Actually, if I were that person, if I were, is it Donald? Is that the first name? McNeil, and I were offered my job back, I would tell them where they could stick that job.
Mm.
I would not want it, but he should not have been fired. McNeil should not have been fired. Um, the beautiful and frighteningly powerful MMA lady should not have been, now actress, should not have been fired. However, retaliatory firings are on the menu. Nicole Hannah Jones should be canned. Should absolutely be canned.
No.
She should be just absolutely just burned out of that place. And in fact, it is my belief that every single day that the New York Times retains her, the New York Times bleeds credibility out into the street. Every single day they retain her at this point. Not only because she's factually incorrect and horrible, and lords around how horrible she is and thinks she's above the law and keeps getting them in the hot water like this. Not only because I happen to personally know they wanted to get rid of her before all of this mess, but they couldn't say no to that dirty Pulitzer they really wanted, and they were scared of her social media thing. I happen to know that. Not only those things, but also she's guilty of the same thing repeatedly in multiple different ethnicities.
Yeah.
Of the thing that the McNeil guy got fired for. She's dropped the hard R N-word on Twitter. She's called people Orientals and all kinds. I see you're not afraid to say the O word. She's called people all kinds of stuff. And then she just thinks she's like, I deleted the tweet. I'm above the law. And it's like, oh no, honey, you got to go. You got to go. So I think there should be some retaliatory cancelings. I think there really should. If we're going to have, so here's my view on this, because it's going to be controversial to say, I think there should be canceling. No, I think that there should be no canceling. However, I think that symmetry is a higher principle. Higher principle, not a lower principle. And so ideally, there must be symmetry. There must be symmetry. Ideally, symmetry would be achieved by nobody canceling anybody. That's the ideal situation. And I put this on Twitter. I phrase it as a consolation prize, is that we're going to have mutually assured cancellation until it stops. And then we can start talking about, and if you want some targets to cancel, chief among them is her. And I see war is good. No, it's not exactly that, right? I think it takes about 3 to 5 of those high-profile cancellations in the opposite direction level the playing field, and they'll be a little more hesitant. Mutually assured destruction was enough to stop nuclear war, should be enough to stop cancel culture.
Yeah, but it didn't stop the Cold War or hostage swapping, which is what you want. You want like some sort of hostage swapping.
No, I want no more cancellation is what I want. I mean, I do want people to be able to be fired for egregiously bad behavior, obviously, not for tweets, not for comments made, not for the use mention distinction, not for things that are just out of anywhere outside. You know, this is just outside of what any reasonable person would say is a fireable offense.
Yeah. Well, there was that Nathan J. Robinson guy who is of the left. He's pretty
of the left, Guardian, right?
Yeah, he's got his own publication, Current Affairs, where he's argued against the existence of cancel culture, but now he's been canceled, so he's trotting back that tune just a little bit.
Yeah, that sucks.
Again, he was fired from the Guardian.
Again, if there's symmetry, then ideally that symmetry comes from nobody getting fired for stupid things. Ideally. But symmetry is the highest principle here, in my opinion, at this point.
What's interesting is you haven't been canceled yet. I mean, you constantly...
I have been canceled. Most of the cancellations that I've received are small in nature, or they're not really worth whining about. I've also built myself... I haven't been removed from like Patreon or YouTube or whatever. So I haven't been canceled in that regard. Yeah. But I don't think if I were... I don't think I would be writing for like the New York Times any longer if that was the thing that I used to do. I mean, I could name the names of people who have, for reputation and or financial reasons, removed me from professional affiliations with them, which is a cancellation. This has happened.
A small C.
But I have no desire to cancel these people back because I actually do take the high road. Nicole Hannah Jones, however, I don't even think it's like cancellation. I think the woman's vastly gone beyond earning getting tossed out of her position at the New York Times Magazine.
Yeah. Well, does she have an actual position, or is she just kind of on retainer at this point? Because she just
I don't know.
Does
I mean,
I
do understand they tried to like shut her down kind of by giving her like nothing important jobs for a while, thinking that that could contain the monster. No, you don't contain the monster. You have to, I don't know what the right phrase is. I was going to say man up. Maybe that is the right phrase. With people who are operating in a hostile takeover ideology, I don't want to just say woke. anyone would do. Anyone would do. It doesn't matter what political or religious affiliation or not that it has. Anyone would do. You cannot contain them. They're a takeover ideology. You have to just you have to do it the whole hog or not at all.
Okay.
You either have to just keep them on staff or you have to get rid of them
completely.
Like trying to contain a campfire in a dry forest. It's just not going to work out very long.
Okay. And we didn't.
Yes, you need to read this literature.
Which
you do
literature?
Need to read it.
Okay, so Jacob
He said,
asked,
"Do we need to read the critical theory literature?" Right? I see a dollars question in my eyes. Is it worthwhile to read woke literature in order to contend with it properly? Yes, it is. It's hard to read. I'm going to try to continue to do series on my own New Discourses podcast where I actually read their literature. I just did one on Marcuse's essay, Repressive Tolerance. It took 4 episodes. It was like 4.5 hours long to get through the essay and comment on it. But the feedback was so positive. I'm going to hit Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins next. I recommend reading, for example, The Critical Race Theory and Introduction. It's a introductory level textbook in critical race theory. It's easy to read. It's only like 140 pages long. It's actually, you can read it in a few hours, 4 hours tops, and take everything in about it. The second time you read it, you'll laugh because it's ridiculous how transparently stupid it is. I recommend reading their introductory literature like Is Everyone Really Equal? That's Robin DiAngelo and Özlem Sensoy from 2012 originally. It's in a second edition now. I have the first edition, so I don't know when the second edition came out. 17 maybe. So I recommend reading. Look for their introductory like textbook level stuff. If you want to try to dive into their academic papers, by all means, they're harder. And the formal books, which we will probably talk about some today, are much more difficult. But I think that like Repressive Tolerance, which I did, it's accessible. And if you go through my stuff, or my what is it, 4-part lecture series, you'll hear it and understand it.
What's the takeaway from Repressive Tolerance that people really need to know in order to understand what's going on within the woke?
Left good, right bad, even if violent. If violence is involved. Let me actually, I have it here. I'm not on my YouTube anymore, so I don't know what the chat is saying. But it says, you are in my way now. I have to move it a little bit. Liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. As I said, that's a quote, direct quote.
Yeah.
Okay, liberating tolerance, that's what he's calling repressive tolerance. He also calls it discriminating tolerance. Would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. Right? As to the scope of this tolerance and intolerance, it would extend to the stage of action as well as of discussion and propaganda, of deed as well as of word. The traditional criterion of clear and present danger seems no longer adequate to a stage where the whole society is in the situation of the theater audience when somebody cries fire. It is a situation in which the total catastrophe could be triggered off any moment, not only by a technical error, but also by a rational miscalculation of risks, or by a rash speech of one of the leaders. In past and different circumstances, the speeches of the fascists and the Nazi leaders were the immediate prologue to the massacre. The distance between the propaganda and the action, between the organization and its release on the people, has become too short. But the spreading of the word could have been stopped before it was too late. If democratic tolerance had been withdrawn when the future leaders started their campaign, mankind would have had the chance of avoiding Auschwitz and a world war. The whole post-fascist period is one of clear and present danger. Consequently, true pacification requires a withdrawal of tolerance before the deed at the stage of communication, word, print, and picture. Such extreme suspension of the right of free speech and free assembly is indeed justified only if the whole of society is in extreme danger. I maintain that our society is in such an emergency situation and that it has become the normal state of affairs. Trying to figure out, there's another place in here where he actually says, this is another thing here. It should be evident by now that the exercise, this is the end of the same paragraph, the exercise of civil rights by those who don't have them presupposes a withdrawal of civil rights from those who prevent their exercise, and that the liberation of the damned of the earth presupposes suppression not only of their old, but also of their new masters. So this is not good, but I want to find a particular other sentence he had.
He's writing in the immediate shadow of the Soviet Union.
He's writing in 1965. He's writing in the immediate precursor to the riots of 1967 and 1968. Withdrawal of the tolerance from regressive movements before they can become active, intolerance even toward thought, opinion, and word, and finally intolerance in the opposite direction, that is, toward the self-styled conservatives, to the political right. These anti-democratic notions respond to the actual development of the democratic society, which has destroyed the basis for universal tolerance. The conditions under which tolerance can again become a liberating and humanizing force have still to be created. When tolerance mainly serves the protection and preservation of a repressive society, when it serves to neutralize opposition and to render men immune against other and better forms of life, then tolerance has been perverted. And when this perversion starts in the mind of the individual, in his consciousness, his needs, when heteronymous interests occupy him before he can experience his servitude, then the efforts to counteract his dehumanization must begin at the place of entrance, where the false consciousness takes form, or rather is systematically formed. It must begin with stopping the words and images which feed this consciousness. To be sure, this is censorship, even pre-censorship, but openly directed against the more or less hidden censorship that permeates the free media. Blah, blah, blah. So he's openly calling for the censorship and pre-censorship. He even has a whole long thing about violence in here.
So basically, explicit bias is justified against implicit bias because he knows that any given word or speech will ultimately lead to an atrocity. We need to filter all words and speech that have led to a specific atrocity in Nazi Germany, but we're going to ignore all the atrocities that are happening just a few thousand miles away in the gulags, correct?
Correct. Right. And that's where he says, there has to be movements from the left must be tolerated. Movements from the right must not be tolerated. Withdrawal of civil rights from the right, extension of rights that even fall outside of the democratic norm to the left. So that would include violence. That's another part of his argument that I didn't read.
Did he ever draw that back or refine that position? Because it doesn't seem logically to
No, he
work
complained that anti-intellectual people took it up and ran wild with it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the unwashed masses.
My movement has become anti-intellectual. Yeah, basically, stupid people started actually doing what I said, and they're like, throwing bricks through the window of a Starbucks, and I don't know how to stop that monster now.
So wait, he was arguing for the. He's even defeating his own argument because he's saying the people who need tolerance most, which are the oppressed, the non-elite, are the ones that we should be protecting. But once the non-elite take his elite status and do whatever they want with it, he wants to pull it back. So he wants. I'm
so glad you saw that so quickly. So yeah, my 4-part lecture series, it starts off in the second part out of the 4. I'm like, you can see the paradox that he's created for himself. His vision for the world has become the tyrant. Left and right, according to the way that he's implicitly defining left and right, have switched roles. And so the things that he's advocating for have become tyrannical. So he has to be simultaneously, because he's very explicitly for, the movements like racial minorities and against consumerism or whatever. So he's very explicitly for left-wing things. And he's also very explicitly against this kind of behavior. So he's for and against his own thing at the same time. But the easiest resolution to this is to see that what is, as you just phrased it, is that basically it's who has the power. And his movement got the power, and they are abusing the living crap out of it, partly on his justification. So, I mean, it takes some work to chew through his language, and you have to understand the context. Like the first time I read it, I was just like, ooh, not good. And I didn't really understand. But when you understand what neo-Marxism is and realize that he's writing this from a neo-Marxist perspective, so when he starts talking about liberating tolerance, that word liberation, I wanted to put this on Twitter today, and I thought about doing a podcast about it, a short one. I had this story where I was talking to him the other day, and they started spouting off, we need liberation from all suffering. That's all work that is a waste of time unless it tries to find liberation from all suffering. And like, oh my God, like, do you know that you're spouting off, Marxist rhetoric? And it's like, no, why does that matter? It's a very Humpty Dumpty kind of a situation. And so it's like people are talking about liberation, but if you don't know what liberation means, like you can't understand what Marcuse is talking about in liberating tolerance.
What is liberation then? What is the basic framework of that
Liberation
concept.
from the oppressions and suffering induced by capitalist liberal orders. That's
Oh,
what liberation is.
okay. And do they
Yeah.
understand how would a state of perpetual, infinite, and across the board liberation look like?
I mean, we'll find out. Give it another couple months.
Okay.
It's not
Okay.
looking
A
good so
couple months.
far.
Okay.
Equity is a liberation doctrine. The liberation movement. I don't know the roots of the liberation movement in full. It's complicated because there's like women's lib is part of it, women's liberation, and that grows out of Marxist feminism, and I know that, but that's older than the liberation movements as they arose, say, in the South American context or in the French Algerian context, where they were seeking liberation from colonialism, which got mixed up with the Marxism. And so you have women's lib was liberation from patriarchy that got mixed up with Marxism. So all of a sudden, patrio-capitalism or whatever,
Yeah.
the cis hetero patriarchal capitalism, white supremacy, it all just got blended into one big mess. But liberation, black nationalism, for example, is a liberation movement. You've got liberation theology that's talking about the point of Jesus coming down was to liberate the oppressed of the earth from their suffering and their oppression. So you get this idea that there's some system that's causing oppression and suffering,
Yes.
and liberation means escaping that. And part of the roots of that are Frantz Fanon, who's a French psychoanalyst, or technically an Algerian French psychoanalyst. And he wrote this book, The Wretched of the Earth. He also wrote Black Skins, White Masks. These are very radical books. They actually advocate openly violence against the colonizers to restore even one sense of dignity and self-worth. And so the liberation movements were pretty violent. I mean, who were in charge of them? What were they? There's a liberation movement that Che Guevara was involved with that. The Viet Cong are the Vietnamese Liberation Front.
It's really interesting that this idea specifically of liberation for some reason unlocks very violent behavior. Like it justifies it, or it accentuates it, or it attracts people who want to participate in it. It seems imminently corruptible.
It is imminently corruptible, and it is imminently corrupt, actually, where it's coming from. It doesn't just attract those people. I argued in my essay I published on Christmas about psychopathy and the origins of totalitarianism that what you actually have when people are aching for liberation, let's take the example of the French postmodernist Michel Foucault. Gay, repressed gay. Dad wanted him to be a doctor. He wanted to be a philosopher. Nobody appreciated his dad, least of all that he was gay. Angry. He wasn't just gay. He was like super BDSM gay. And if you're into that, okay, fine. But like safe words and stuff. And he was like masochistic and was into that. And then he wanted pedophilia. I mean, he was all about getting rid of the age of consent laws in France. So we're not talking about. So when he's talking about liberation, he's talking about liberation from the judgments that prevented that from being acceptable. Gay, I'm with you. Limited BDSM, good for you, I guess. Do your, fly your freak flag, buddy. Some of that other stuff, not so much. And what Foucault talked about all the time was expanding the potentialities of being. And so that's his idea of liberation. Now, he's not a huge liberationist, though. You want like Marcuse, we're just reading him. He's got an essay on liberation in 1969 he wrote that's one of the more properly cracked essays I've ever read. But he also has, in 1955, a book he wrote called Eros and Civilization. And Eros and Civilization is his attempt to wed Marx and Freud. It's quite explicitly that's the project. And what he's talking about with liberation, he says that the consumerist capitalist society causes people to repress, to suppress their libido and to their libidinal urges, and to suppress all of that and to channel it into productive work, like going to work and doing your job all day instead of, I guess, having sex and fighting. And it's that repressed libido being channeled into work that needs to be liberated, according to Marcuse. It's like, so I don't think Marcuse, I'm almost positive Marcuse was not gay. I think he just wanted to have orgies and such. And so again, it's the same kind of thing. Those libidinal urges. He wanted liberation from the expectations of society, to show up and do your job every day, to do the best job you can, to participate as a good member of society, and the economy, therefore, is how they always see all of these kind of critical theorists and postmodernists see being a good member of society. They translate it very cynically into being a good member of the economy, of being a cog in the economist machine, or the economic machine. And that's the thing they want liberation from. The goods of society that would come in, and it's a crackpot dream. Like the person I was talking to the other day, he was like, if you're not working for the liberation of all humans from all suffering, like, that's not going to happen. Suffering is coming. Like the Stoics have that kind of right. Suffering. Everybody is going to die. Either you're going to die before them, or you're going to watch some of them die. That's what's going to happen. Suffering is coming. Calamities are coming. You're in the Pacific Northwest, you have a snow day, but you never know when one of those volcanoes might blow up. Mm-hmm. Suffering will come. You never know when the wildfire is going to rip across California. Suffering will come. Or even where you were. You guys had wildfires last year.
Yeah.
We had wildfires a couple of years ago. They weren't that wild. It was some kid started them.
Yeah.
Throwing matches.
Down in Oregon too. Yeah. Yeah. Same here.
Yeah. So suffering's coming, right? Even if it's just stupid suffering, even if it's like an ingrown toenail, like, suffering's coming. There's no liberation from all suffering. Mm-hmm. And so it's a crackpot dream. And so they start getting, it's like I said, I think psychologically, it's people who are not well equipped psychologically to handle the world as it is. And they wish for a world that was more perfect than it can be. And then this is going to attract more broken people. So broken people will see this and glom onto it. And then it will also attract psychopaths who will manipulate this thing, because it's fantasy land and you have highly manipulable people there. And that's more or less, I think, why it turns into such a den of like cluster B personality disorders and psychopaths. And then more kind of tragically, I don't know if schizoid is a cluster B personality, but I think a lot of it actually a lot of feminism, I think, stems from schizoid personality. And there's some evidence in the literature. They call it schizoidia in that literature. But the Poles, you see, will research this. No one else will. The Poles will research this.
It's interesting. What do you think? What have you seen is a good way to attract the broken, to give the broken shelter, to give the broken some sense of meaning, to counter this? What do we do with them?
That's hard. I mean, that's hard, right? Because
not that hard.
The most
right,
basic way. That's hard. It's alt-right, as a matter of fact. The difficult part is that, on some level, you can oversimplify the entire equation down to responsible people versus resentful people, and that's not my formulation. Since I want to disclaim that I can't talk about whose it is at the moment, but it'll become clear eventually. But resentful people versus responsible people, and responsibility is harder. And so, for example, what you see psychologically speaking, a lot of people have tended to notice, as I think Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff wrote, that what they see in a lot of the so-called coddling of the American mind and this woke stuff is like anti-cognitive behavioral therapy. It's like the opposite. It's like it makes people less mentally well. And that's where, the kind of things that I've been mentioning, I think, become really relevant. Well, the thing is that real cognitive behavioral therapy not only is under attack by the woke as being too white and racist now, but it's also difficult. Learning to face your own shadow, learning to face your own demons, learning to take responsibility for your own failures is much harder. And as long as you have a situation where people can just use magic words, for us right now, related to trauma, harm, or oppression, and basically get their way, there's no incentive structure whatsoever. So the incentives have to be there that create a circumstance where responsibility is deemed more valuable than and basically the only way you can do that is by removing the incentives to throwing a toddler level fit in the floor. And
Yeah, well, it goes back to what you were saying about equality or balance between cancel cultures, and either lifting all cancellation or punishing people evenly. And it also goes back to the Capitol riot versus the 2020 protests. Like if we're going to condemn one group, we have to condemn the other. And if you don't condemn both equally, or if you over condemn one and brush the other one aside, we're not going to have any justice. There will not be justice. There will be more and more repression if we allow that to continue. And it seems like they're going down that route. What's his name? Anderson Cooper the other day compared the Capitol riot to the Rwanda genocide. Like, that is how they are painting this story. And when it first broke, I'm saying, I don't know what happened, but I know what the story is going to be used to do. And we have to be careful and restrain the story of the Capitol riot specifically. So, but it's all tilted in one direction. It's one direction.
It's absolutely asymmetrically told.
Yeah.
It's absolutely asymmetrically told. You can imagine a parallel universe like Earth 2, where for some reason the polarization's the other way, and these idiots with zip ties and the guy with the podium are considered to be just like unbelievable revolutionary heroes, and we're building freaking statues to them, and it's just as clownish. Although I do appreciate the memes, I won't lie. I do appreciate the memes.
Yeah. There's just so much fishy stuff.
I love the one where they like photoshopped Jack Dorsey's face on the guy that was carrying the podium, and they replaced the American seal with free speech, and showed him like carrying the free speech away and waving. I liked that meme.
There was one that actually, there was a picture that ended up in the FBI report, if I recall correctly, where somebody photoshopped a very crude...
the giant penis black man behind the
schlongy guy into the actual report.
That guy's got a big one, man. I tell you, I saw that picture. Yeah. Somebody sent it to me. I'm like, what the hell is this? And I was like, whoa, okay. I think I went to college with that guy.
I think
there really was. There was a guy more physically fit than that, but similarly built in my dorm on my floor. His name was Adonis, of all fucking things.
Oh, James the Boar.
True story.
Down.
It's true. It's a true story.
So
I don't mean to dock or whatever.
With regards to the Frankfurt school, we did I did an excerpt a couple weeks ago or last week where I excerpted from our talk with Wokel and you the part about the woke ratchet, or the way in which discourse clicks in one direction, and once it clicks this way, everything to the right of where it's moved is all in the dumpster bin. And I received some interesting feedback where it works on both sides, where this is just a basic rhetorical maneuver that's used by whoever's in power, will always be turning, twisting the dial in one direction.
That's kind of true. It is one of the abuses of power. And I do think that it's one of those things that we should be aware of and critical of. Right now, and for a very long time, our intellectual class has been twisting this ratchet one direction for very effectively. There's been not very much real robust conservative thought probably since like Goldwater, if you count him. And that's like getting on 50 years. Not a lot of
what would you classify as conservative thought then?
Well, Goldwater was conservative, certainly. So, conservatism is its own ideology, right? And so conservative thought is that which, depending on how conservative you want to be and how strict you want to be, is, as they said, standing astride standing athwart the stream of history and saying either stop or slow down, one or the other. And so, depends on which dimension you're talking about. Are we talking about, maybe cultural change is happening a little too fast? Maybe we should slow down. Maybe we should stop. Maybe social change is happening too fast. Maybe with immigration, maybe we're integrating too many people too quickly, and that's going to water down the roots of culture. That would be a point in conservative thought. With economic thought, maybe we are screwing around with, our financial system in ways that are going too fast, that are reckless, that are going to create either bubbles or going to create financial bubbles, which will pop. Maybe we're screwing around with it in ways that will lead to hyperinflation or something like that can get away from us. And maybe we should be a little more conservative. So there are points upon which there's been some conservative thought, but there's not any, as far as I can tell, any deep, robust, strong, big picture. Yeah, Roger Scruton, maybe, Clifford, good point. But there's not been like a deep conservative kind of comprehensive philosophy, and it's certainly not been empowered within our intellectual spheres in the same way that we have both the kind of like softly progressive liberal and then absolutely radical leftist philosophy happening. This asymmetry is happening mostly at the university level, and think tanks always tend to be, pretty focused. They're not like conservative thought overall. They tend to be, policy focused, whether it's about, like Heritage Foundation by its name should be about retaining American heritage, for example, or something like that. American Enterprise Institute should be about American enterprise. So something to do with business.
But in the face of ideas like Marcuse's, where everything to the right is one step away or potentially fascistic and potentially completely genocidal, and therefore only the left can be forwarded, only the left can proceed. In the face of that, no conservative thought can stand. No even
That's right.
Distantly.
And it's even worse when you add in the postmodern deconstruction. Because deconstruction constructs that which is established, and conservative thought seeks to conserve that which is established to some degree. Not necessarily the establishment, but that which is established. And so in that regard, when you take both the critical theory, which looks for the contradictions within that which is established, and then with Marcuse pins them literally like 1 inch or millimeter or whatever away from we're tipping into the Nazis now. By the way, in the, Stalin, like, don't look over there though. That's okay. Mao, he actually praises the Chinese Revolution in the same essay, if you don't know. And I think he praises Cuba, but I don't remember if he does or if somebody else does. I could word search it and find out. You have a real problem there, right? Where you have this like super leftist, okay, anything vaguely right, not okay. Yeah. And so that's the critical theory thing. It's like, let's take that which is and find the contradictions to do the so-called dialectical process on them and tear it apart. Conservative things are not going to stand up well to that. When you add in deconstruction, which is like a super advanced technique for that, take which, that which is established and deconstruct it. Again, conservative things don't really have a whole lot to stand up against that. Because what it takes to stand up against that is to have basically enough backbone to say, no, there are limits to how far this kind of, you hear this criticism, I don't know how to phrase this, from the neo-reactionary types a lot, that liberalism contains the seeds of its own demise, because liberalism is inherently willing to criticize itself and that which is going on within the liberal order. And the problem is that it's within... there are limits to where not only is that okay, it's necessary. We don't want to stagnate. We don't want to be stuck in a status quo. We do want to make progress where progress is possible. However, if you have like an industrial solvent, you really only want to use it where the thing is stuck or where the grease is built up or whatever. You don't where it's particularly dirty. You don't just want to dump it everywhere.
There's
Mr.
a level.
Mr. Farted, I was supposed to talk to Megyn Kelly yesterday, so that got canceled because of the Senate hearing. You can complain about that to whoever you like. Hopefully, I'll talk to her soon.
There's a level of wokeness that's being employed in order to preserve and conserve power with regards to woke capital, with regards to the actual managerial elite, so-called. They are allowing, there's this balkanization. They're allowing critical theory. They're allowing leftist thoughts. They're allowing these riots in the streets because in a certain respect, it doesn't actually threaten them. So there's this two-facedness. Is there not this two-facedness?
Yeah, they don't realize that it threatens them. It does threaten them. But no, this is definitely the case. And this is where Marcuse would wiggle out of his own responsibility, I think. The way that he would wiggle out is to say that capitalism has bought my movement, basically, has stolen it and subverted it, and then we would say real communism has never been tried after the fact. Real repressive tolerance never happened. The capitalist cis heteropatriarchy bought into it or whatever, and started selling it back to people. And this is just such. This is probably why there are no excellent critiques of communism, because they always just claim that some stupid powered interest stole it and prevented it. So I don't know. That's what they would say. It certainly is the case that they have become the power. I just released a podcast on New Discourses earlier today talking about how they have proved themselves not only to be the power, but to be outside of Popper's paradox of tolerance. They have showed themselves to be that which Popper said we should be intolerant against, where Marcuse said intolerant of right, tolerant of left, even when violence is involved. Popper had a more refined explanation of when intolerance, like he says we should, if we want to preserve tolerance, we have to reserve the right to intolerance. Everybody who understands the military understands this in a very simple way. If you have two entities, one of whom's willing to use violence to conquer the other, and the other is utterly committed to nonviolence, it's really easy to figure out what's going to happen next, right? You're going to have one larger state that the violent person controls. And so that's the argument for a standing defensive military. And it makes perfect sense. It's the same thing here. Popper's argument was that we have to reserve the right to be intolerant against ideas and ideologies, and his conditions, under certain conditions. And his conditions were when they refuse to listen to rational argument and can no longer be contained by public opinion. Wokeness has gone outside of both of those parameters.
What do you mean contained by public opinion?
So a good example is when the neo-Nazis, like 7 of them, marched through Skokie, Illinois, and they, Jewish groups, et cetera, tried to shut them down. And the Supreme Court, and I think even the ACLU, got involved. I know the Supreme Court ended up saying, no, they have the right to that expression, right? They have the freedom of that expression. The Supreme Court stood up for that. And why? Why would something as hateful and intolerant as neo-Nazi ideology be defended by our Supreme Court under our First Amendment? And the answer was because public opinion is keeping the neo-Nazis at bay. There aren't very many of them. They don't have any power. Most people, probably greater than 98%, 99% of the population, when they hear that crap, are like, that's crap, shut up, I don't want to hear it. And so public opinion is keeping the intolerant ideology in check in and of itself, right? Neo-Nazi ideology is horrifically intolerant. I don't know any neo-Nazis, actually. I met one guy spouting kind of Nazi-ish ideology recently and fought against him. Actually, I didn't fight against him. I tried how to have impossible conversations. And he said that he was as convicted as a suicide bomber, so it didn't really go very far. I don't know what you do against that level of conviction to a belief. Yeah. That's, by the way, the roots of my big anti-Semitism Jewish controversy on Twitter. We can tell that story if you want to at some point. Yeah. But the long and short with this was that he has a very, he wasn't amenable to rational argument. So he's outside of one of Popper's conditions. But everybody else around was like, what in the hell are you talking about? He wasn't gaining any traction with the people. Yeah. Right. Okay. It wasn't out of control. So that had its own kind of limiting factor. And Popper said when you have to reserve the right to be intolerant is when that starts to slip.
Okay. But is there not a level of gambling that these corporations are using to, they see wokeness as a performative guise. They see all these trainings as a way to filter out people that will be good sheep or bad sheep.
Maybe.
The constant totally bowing to the Twitter mobs because they just do a cost analysis and say, okay, well, we'll fire Gina, I think her name is, because she compared, the treatment of Republicans to something along the lines of what the Nazis were doing. But then the other star of The Mandalorian comparing the way that immigrants are treated directly to Nazi concentration camps. So there's an asymmetry, but they're just doing a cost analysis. Their interests are maintained. This culture war doesn't actually affect the deep roots of globalism, the IMF, and et cetera, and so on and so forth. Is there not just a way in which wokeness is tying a lot of our hands by grabbing so much attention and causing us to have spats in the street when the owners of the actual marketplace, they aren't actually affected by it?
There's some argument that that's why they back it, but it will vary from company to company. Disney is probably actually actively woke. Other companies, which I shouldn't name because I've talked to people high up in them, are actually just doing the cynical analysis. They're literally A/B testing within their company to see which one works out better.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And so you have some of both. And you certainly do have this, I think, arrogant belief on the part of many of these larger entities that they can't actually be touched by the excesses of the woke. And I don't think they understand the dragon they've reared. But I also do think they have enough power to where basically these people, like, the reason they won't be able to be touched, like, I don't know, I don't want to use like Bezos as an example because I don't know where he stands on this matter, but we'll use him just as a stand-in, as somebody who has that much money and power and influence. He can, if he's funding woke people, he knows he can just turn off the tap at any given moment and decide I'm not funding that anymore. So that's a different kind of thing. But there are actually people who are corporate leaders who are taking the agendist point of view. And whether that's because it's to their advantage, as you've kind of described in this sort of critical, cynical kind of way, or whether it's because they actually believe it, it's hard to parse out. Other corporate leaders are actually literally like, whatever. And then others are like, I don't even know what it is, but it sounds bad. I don't really want to have to deal with this trouble. What's the path of least resistance? And they're choosing that. Just because there's a green one here, Mr. Alpha Zero Beta, would I consider contacting Stephen Hassan about cult-like aspects? Stephen Hassan contacted me and told me because I'm anti-woke that I am in a cult. So that didn't go well, which is really funny.
Hassan?
Stephen Hassan is a world-leading cult expert. He's the founder of the creator of the BITE model of cult analysis, which is behavior, information, thought, and environment, or something like that, or emotion control, something like that. And he got sucked into a cult, and then got out of the cult, and then explained where cults come from with this BITE model, which he didn't give a step-by-step program for how cults arise. He just explained that all cults use this BITE approach. But when I wrote my Cult Dynamics of Wokeness, he actually reached out to me and told me that I'm actually in a cult and that I don't understand cults at all, and that he understands cults better, and he got all defensive of woke, and I'm thinking he's just in a cult again and doesn't know it. So whatever.
I see a lot of just roaming cultists. They just jump ship, and can only ever see.
And Nicole, you are welcome for speaking up against anti-Semitism and wokeness. I'm going to keep doing it. It's important. And if I have to tell that story so people know where that awful tweet came from, we can pollute your channel with it.
Okay, what are we polluting now? Are we doing the anti-Semitism?
Okay, so
is that what we're going to
I know we're supposed to be talking about critical theory. We were going to talk about Walter Benjamin and lived experience. And we're going to talk about the 3 phases of the Frankfurt School and how it's complicated and da 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 da. But we're just such good buds, man. Okay, so here's what happened. I touched the third rail on Twitter, as many people will know.
About once a month. It's kind of like a lunar thing for you, right? Your wife gets she starts to menstruate, and then you're like, okay, I got to get this out of me. And then you go
right, exactly. You know how it goes. Crazy begets crazy. And so, I'm in trouble. Okay, so what happened?
I've set you up for getting in trouble there.
No, what happened? On Twitter, I tweeted something saying that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and that we should be concerned about this. Now, I'm going to give myself more nuance than I could fit into 280 characters, but I'll try not to be unfair to what I actually tweeted. Yeah. I tweeted that there is left-wing anti-Semitism in CRT and related things. I called it normal. Apparently, that was a bad word choice. Normal anti-Semitism. What I meant is there's the usual anti-Semitism that some people on the far right already occupy. And then I said there's extra, and apparently that's also a bad word, anti-Semitism arising on the reactionary right as a result of seeing progressive, nonsensically woke, I said, Jews. And in other words, I said that what I intended to say is that there are reactionaries who see woke Jews and say, must be the Jews are the problem, rather than it's woke that is the problem. But you're never allowed to suggest that Jewish people doing anything might contribute to anti-Semitism. So there's a backstory to this. I had actually run into somebody in person I was having a conversation with, and this person was quite, as I said, convicted to a suicide bomber level, he said. And it was a very weird conversation. So I'm at dinner, I'm talking, there's all these people at the table. Obviously, I already said, nobody else at the table was like this. It wasn't like I went to some freaking Nazi convention. It was like normal people. And this guy just starts, he's a youngish guy, a far right guy, apparently. And he starts talking about how we're at war, and this is already a war, and we have to fight it like a war. And it's like very like bellicose, but it's like touches something that's not wholly false. And then it starts getting like grimmer, right? And he's like, saying, we have to start admitting where all this comes from. And we can actually segue into the Frankfurt School about this because it's relevant. That if you look at the Frankfurt School, and I actually get to hear this. I'm unfortunately have to or get to or hear this a lot from people because I talk about the Frankfurt School. Almost everybody involved prominently within the Frankfurt School was Jewish. They were almost all
correct.
Jews. German Jewish, yes. Yeah. And they reactionaries who are looking at this situation and they're seeing how many progressive people in high profile places in media, education, law, etc. are Jewish, pushing woke stuff. And they are connecting the dots incorrectly and saying Jewish is the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's a form of anti-Semitism. And I said that form is on the rise. And I didn't word it, I guess, well enough for Twitter, which went berserk. But the truth is that this guy said this stuff and he started going into it like in pretty grotesque detail. We have to just start admitting that the Jews are the problem, blah, blah, blah. He's saying this. And I'm like, dude, I went straight into like how to have impossible conversations, like time to defuse this. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Do you not realize that some of the biggest critics of critical theory were Jewish? Some of the earliest critics were Jewish. Milton Friedman was Jewish. Like, do you not realize that Jewish isn't the relevant variable here? And he's like, no, it is. And he's like, all about it. And he gets more and more and he starts talking about, he's like, people like you, he says this to me to my face, are very useful to the movement right now. People like you are very useful to the movement right now, but ultimately you're too much of a sympathizer to the liberal view and to the Jewish view. And so you'll have to be done away with or forcibly converted. And I said, dude, that's literally Hitler. And his response to me was, at least Hitler knew how to deal with communists. And I was like, oh shit, we're in dark water here. Yeah, and so this is like in the back of my head. And I'm talking to a friend of mine the day that I made the infamous tweet telling this person the story. And I was like, I should just tweet that. And it was like, yeah, you should. Apparently, no, I should not have, apparently. Okay. But the thing
I can see a defensiveness from Jewish individuals and Jews as a society to not want to be associated with things that will stick more hate on their backs than they already get.
I understand. I totally understand. I'm trying to warn that there is a dynamic that is occurring. I do not think that this is a good dynamic. I do not think it's okay that it's happening. In fact, I'm freaked out by this dynamic, which is that there are reactionaries who are seeing, oh my God, a lot of this came from the Frankfurt School. Mm-hmm. Wow, they're all Jewish. And if you actually go back and read Walter Benjamin, he's got this whole thing. So he's writing in like 1913 before the Frankfurt School even starts. He's got this whole thing about how like Jews have like they're like the most superior. It's like this whole thing that he writes. I just saw it again the other day. I don't remember exactly how it's worded. And it's like, they're connecting dots that don't need to be connected, but there are reasons that those dots, like the whole thing. Why can't you say cultural Marxism? Cultural Marxism, you go to Wikipedia now, it says that it's cultural Marxism, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Yeah, same with globalist. You can't say that either.
So yeah, well, exactly. And what the reason is because all of the cultural Marxists, except for Antonio Gramsci, were Jewish, or German Jewish. And so here you actually had people who wanted to undo the Western liberal order for some different thing that Marcuse calls historical possibilities, which he means communism. And they want to undo the Western liberal order. They all happen to be Jewish. They're in a secret cabal working together, the Frankfurt School, which was a think tank. And so it's very easy to create a nasty conspiracy theory that misses the relevant variable. The relevant variable here is not Jewish. The relevant variable here is communist. And when I say this, now these reactionary types come at me. I get it on Twitter a lot. Jewish equals communist. It's like, no, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. What are you talking about? No, it doesn't. And so this is where that third rail came into, or my touching the third rail came into effect. This was the story behind that. I've not told the story behind that yet. I was literally standing up to an anti-Semite, and I put something derived from that story on Twitter, and I get called the anti-Semite. And I understand somebody at the New York Times is still considering working on that story to tell it. But it's important to speak up and talk about this because anti-Semitism is on the rise. And it is on the rise on both sides. And it is that same, I think you and I talked about it before, Benjamin. Did we talk about the Michael Jackson bad dance? Like they got the gang and it was like and it's theatricized, I guess, in the music video, Michael Jackson's Bad. And that's what I see as like the alt-right and the woke left. It's like they're the two gang members. But if you picture that like really happening in a bar or a restaurant, they'd be knocking over tables and all kinds of terrible things, like all this collateral damage would be happening that nobody wants. That's what I see is going on. The far left and the far right, even around the issue of anti-Semitism, are accelerating one another. Now it gets more complicated because like the SPLC just dropped, for example, their willingness to look into hate crime that comes from people who happen to be black. And they are no longer referring to like some of the openly anti-Semitic stuff, like Black Hebrew Israelites or Black nationalists or whatever. They're saying, oh no, that's Black separatism. It's not technically whatever would qualify as a hate group. It's not Black supremacy. It's Black separatism. It's different.
I kind of noticed that pattern about criticisms that COVID was giving rise to anti-Asian hate. But it was very lowly reported, and every time I saw it reported, it was the wrong identity that was participating in this. So they didn't want to boost up certain identities looking bad.
That's happening again. Only now it's like literal physical violence because there are no police. Defund the police. And I just saw an argument somebody was making on Twitter earlier today. It was like, no, Asian American communities will suffer more if there's more police, blah, blah, blah. Somehow anti-blackness makes it into that sentence. That doesn't make any sense. And it's like, no. No. So bad things are happening. And it's being driven because we have people empowering identity politics again at the very bottom. And like I should point out, I don't want to feel like I'm coming off defensively because I don't feel defensive about what I said. I just said something true. But the fact is that I have received literally probably in excess of 5,000 thank you notes from Jews all over the world for bringing this up.
Okay.
I would assume they're mostly conservative Jews.
Yeah.
Like 5,000 thank you notes for rabbis, blah, blah, blah. I mean, all these people talking to me. It's a problem that people apparently, I got people called me. They're like, James, it's true, but you can't say it. And I'm like, I only have one thing that goes in the category of things that might possibly be true. I don't think it's true, actually. But because I don't know, I won't talk about it.
I was going to say it must be hard to be an identity that keeps on getting pegged with the worst aspects of humankind. And then I looked at my picture as a white man on the screen. So I don't know how to at once sympathize with the people who are getting assigned, so let's say Jews who are being assigned this woke label and all Jews are communist, or communism is a product of Jewishness. I get assigned, just because of my identity, that capitalism and all the evils of capitalism are the fault of the white male. And so I'm a stand-in for that. So it just, you kind of, you talk about it, you call it out as a white man or whatever, you try to get over that. But then one identity after another identity after another identity is thrown under the bus, or retracted from being thrown under the bus.
I said this a very long time ago, that the purpose of intersectionality was to get all of the identity groups to carry water for queer black feminism, which is a particular radical ideology, queer black feminism, which was basically kind of
No, you're not.
formulated in the Combahee River Collective in the late 1970s. And the whole point was just to get other so-called minority groups to carry water for them. And then this summer, the trap was sprung, and all of a sudden it was like, nope, there's only one. And so it was like, you remember the fight between, it was like Black Lives Matter, and they're like, trans Black Lives Matter. And it was like, all Black Lives Matter, you know, like, what do you do? Yeah. So it's like that huge fight. It's like, but the whole thing was, it's narrowing down to try to push. Intersectionality is built around getting so-called solidarity points in one direction. It's all a power dynamic based concept. It points in one direction, and the direction it points is queer Black feminism. And it is designed, therefore, to empower queer. You're not allowed to say this, but it's just freaking true. It is designed to empower queer Black feminists, who, by the way, are not very commonly Jewish, as you might notice. Not a lot of.
I have a hard time picturing that, but maybe.
There's not a lot of Black Jews from the American context, right?
Is there anything particular about queer Black feminism other than that particular subset of identities? Is there anything novel about that actual ideology, or is it just? So two things, really. It really is the inheritor of second generation Frankfurt School. We didn't talk about the generations of the Frankfurt School yet. Well, we should probably do that then.
Yeah, we will. And it was the first one to really pick up postmodernism as its tools. So that's why it's the precursor from which the woke movement came. That's why intersectionality is the key concept at the center of wokeness. So they were the ones who picked up, and it's partly the queer influence, frankly, but they were the ones who picked up the postmodern tools first, but they were also like this hyper concentrated version of the aftermath of the second generation Frankfurt School. Frankfurt School can be cut into, we'll just dive right into that, right? Frankfurt School can be kind of cut into three phases. The first phase we'll refer to as phase one. That began in roughly 1919 or 20. We could talk about who the influences are. Walter Benjamin was involved. We just mentioned him a minute ago. Antonio Gramsci liaised with them until 26, when he got thrown in prison in Italy by the fascists. Georg Lukács, the Hungarian, he was part of the architecture of the Hungarian Communist Revolution that fell apart after a few months, was instrumental in creating it. Max Horkheimer was there. I don't know if Adorno was involved yet. Eventually, Adorno was very central. Eventually, Marcuse joined. But the first generation, the big thinkers, are going to be, to some degree, Walter Benjamin. He's a little bit off to the side, a little bit tangential. Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno. That's the first generation. Then what happened? Remember, there's like 1920. Then what happened? WWII happened.
Okay, so they're writing in the wake of the First World War.
Correct.
I don't know under what state.
No. They are writing in, let's fix this. Okay. They are writing in the wake of the First World War, yes, but what they're really writing in the wake of is the failed communist revolution in Hungary. They are writing having seen only one successful communist revolution, which was the Bolshevik Russian Revolution. All the rest were falling apart or non-starters or getting beaten back. And that was the problem they were trying to solve, is why won't the West go communist? Mm-hmm. The World War shapes their thinking. These guys all came of age in World War I, during World War I. So it definitely shapes their thinking. But they weren't writing about the World War. They were writing about why has only a peasant society taken up communism when Marx predicted it would be the industrial societies. Why isn't London and Berlin? Why aren't those places leading? Why isn't New York? Why isn't Chicago leading the communist revolutions of the world? Why is it some stupid peasant backwater in Russia is the only place it took? And even Hungary failed. And when I say Georg Lukács was central to this, remember, he was one of the architects and people working on the Hungarian Revolution. So when that failed, that's when he ran off. He scampered off. It failed in 1919. He scampered off to try to build the Frankfurt School with these other thinkers. So that's what they're writing in the wake of.
And their assumption is not that communism might be flawed, but that the implication, the implementation.
Good, Marx wrong.
Oh, okay. So what was
Communism
wrong
good.
about
Marx
Marx
wrong
then?
about how to get
Okay.
there.
Okay, about how to get there. Okay.
Yeah. And so you could argue this is the birth of what that terrible phrase you're not allowed to say, cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism. Antonio Gramsci is the father of cultural Marxism. He argued, and all of these guys, what they did was, I know that this is a little bit heavy. What Marx did, Marx basically took Hegel's thought about phenomenology, from the phenomenology of spirit in particular, and made it materialistic, put it in the material world. He called that dialectical materialism. He also, through the rest of his theories, he basically just imported a lot of Rousseau's kind of worst thought. From what I've been told recently, I haven't dug into this yet, but apparently he largely plagiarized Rousseau, which is why it had. Where do you think? Why is Marx's thought bent on the French concept that preceded the French Revolution of the bourgeoisie? That's a French concept. Why the hell is Marx talking about it? Oh yeah, because he just imported that aspect of Rousseau apparently pretty blindly. So at any rate, Marx.
Can we just distill? Okay, let's distill it down to the basic assumptions. The Rousseauian blank slate, is that correct? Like that human
blank
beings
slate, social contract
are good.
Emotion over reason, failure of the Enlightenment, rational Enlightenment view of the world, that you cannot actually get to truth that way. The real truth is in your emotional experience.
Okay. And
That's
through
Rousseau.
a dialectical process of history revising itself through, I guess, infinite revolution, it will eventually bring the pure individual that in a state of nature was unflawed, but then civilization corrupted nature, learning corrupted the goodness of humans.
Yes.
Through history, we will purge all of that thought, that rationality, and achieve a rebirth of the pure human. Is that a good, solid, simple conception?
That's a good, simple, That's right. And so Marx made it materialistic, and then Gramsci and the cultural Marxists in the Frankfurt School flipped it back over and took it back to Hegel. They even say that they quote and reference Hegel all the time. They criticize Marx and say we have to use the Hegelian method. We have to talk about Hegel. So they restored the Hegel to the Marxian idea. Okay, so that's the birth of cultural Marxism. That's what makes it cultural Marxism versus regular Marxism.
Okay, so it's no longer an economic justice framework. It's a cultural justice framework. It's achieving equality of income and outcome of cultural classes.
I don't know that they talk about that. This is kind of where that liberation idea comes from, but it's more that they were, how do we get the proles to have their stupid revolution? And we have to break down their cultural mores that basically they're anchored by things like family, education, religion, law, the prominent and dominant ideologies. So that creates a hegemony, they argued, and we have
that's perpetuating the system of injustice.
Exactly. And so we break that down, and then we can get towards something like the communism that Marx was talking about. So their argument was it's not through seizing the means of economic production, but rather through seizing the means of cultural production that one creates the revolution. Yeah. And they probably were kind of right about that.
Free your mind.
It turns out that the revolution's a bad idea, though.
Well, we've yet to see that, James.
Say again?
In all honesty, we've yet to see
if it's stalled.
In all honesty, we haven't
seen it. Real communism hasn't been tried.
Yeah, we haven't.
Real communism has never been tried and never will be tried. It will be corrupted every single time when all of the millions of people starve to death.
Okay,
every single time,
even culturally. So we did for the phase one. These academics, these thinkers, are trying to reboot, trying to fix Marxism, trying to fix Hegelian structures and superstructure, blah 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 blah, through a cultural means, and they bring in concepts of attacking nuclear family, attacking all these categories of disparity, from race relations to gender relations to all these different.
But somewhat, yeah.
They built a framework.
Complicated. It's complicated because the Marxist feminists, mostly, especially in the United States, but to some degree in the UK, already started taking up that argument with regard to patriarchy, right? But the Frankfurt School people themselves very rarely talked about that until the second phase.
Okay.
They mostly talked about culture like the way that we used to mean culture. Like, oh, as Adorno might have it, jazz music is trash, but it's culture to go listen to classical music, right?
Okay.
You
Okay.
know, lifestyles of the rich and famous. You know, that's culture.
Okay.
And they were saying that the cultural production had been corrupted by the consumer capitalist economy and created this lowbrow middle culture that captured people's interest and kept them brainwashed so that they wouldn't realize that they could free themselves to high culture and understand and read the right things and listen to the right
Oh,
music.
okay.
Adorno had reams and reams and reams that he wrote just shitting all over jazz. He hated jazz. Granted, why? Came out of Weimar Germany, which he saw destroy jazz, like the hoppinest jazz clubs were going to be in Weimar Germany, in Berlin and stuff. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, maybe he's got like a reason that he's mad at jazz, right? But
Mm-hmm.
nevertheless, it was, you know, he was a classically trained musician. He was very interested in people listening to, you know, proper classical music and not this trash jazz that they might have.
It as an artist, well, as a budding artist, I grappled with those concepts. Why do people not want high art? Why do they like low art? And you just have to like, my solution is that tastes vary. Low and
Tastes very,
middlebrow work because it works for the most people. It collects the
yeah.
most amount of attention. It's not about trying to reshape. You don't reshape attention. You try to trick attention into getting higher, but you don't go and I don't know. It seems like their
No, I mean, so
way
I
of
saw
dealing with
this
this is a
study.
little.
I don't know if this is true. Somebody sent me this one time, and I think it's true. Maybe it's not true, but it's about blueberry tasters of all fucking things.
Ooh.
So people whose job it is to taste blueberries.
Yeah.
Sounds like not a bad job, right? So they rate them, you know, this variety, this plant or whatever, you know, rabbit eye or whatever different kinds of northern high bush, whatever the different kinds are. Those are real types, by the way. Rabbit eye,
Okay.
northern high bush,
I
southern
could
high
tell.
bush.
I could tell. Yeah.
The low bush is another type. Bilberry,
Is there a
huckleberry.
midbush?
Yeah. Anyway, there's lots of different types, and there are people whose job it is to taste the different varietals and to rate them, like scored 1 to 10. And so what they figured out is that the people who score the highest, they're the berries, I should say, that score the highest consistently with professional tasters. When they give them to normal people, they're like, that's a weird berry. They
Yeah.
don't like it. And then the ones that the public want the best, the ones that they like the best,
Or
when you give them to the
uninteresting.
professional tasters, are described with words like watery,
Yeah.
insipid,
Yeah.
you know, things like that. But they also tend to be physically large. Like the public just wants the big blueberry. It doesn't matter if it tastes like crap. Uh, and so it's like there actually is, as you said, taste vary. There's actually a gigantic market for low and middle brow tastes.
Yeah.
It's fun to go to a dive bar.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fun to go slumming and not like as like I'm experiencing poor people culture. It's just fun. Like
Yeah.
there's this bar I used to go to when I was in college, when I was doing my PhD, where I live, and it's like they had this outdoor backyard like picnic area thing. It was just like just random grilling pork chops and stuff, and it was just like so redneck. It was so awesome. We went there all the time. It was great. It wasn't like we were like, oh, we're the elites looking down on these plebs. No, it's
Yeah.
just freaking fun, right? So there's different tastes. There's different. It's like burgers, right? You go and everybody knows there's like gourmet burgers. Like they have like
Yeah.
Wagyu beef and they taste like shit. They suck every time,
Yeah.
right? And then there's like fancy burger, and then there's restaurant burger, and then there's like
McDonald's.
diner burger.
Yeah.
And we all know that diner burger is real burger. All the other burgers are pretense, right?
Well,
We all know this.
It seems like there's this specialization of taste where once you start devoting yourself to one particular aesthetic experience, whether that's cooking or cocktail making or music, or you get into something and your tastes progress beyond that massive, you know, where most people's are.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
when
That's
you
right.
have a bunch of specialists, they all converge on something. When the specialist is done tasting the berry, they do just kind of want to go to a dive bar and pal around with their friends and stuff. Underneath,
I think Anthony Bourdain had a whole thing about that, right? It was
Hmm.
like how he would cook all this gourmet food and you have to nibble and taste and do everything. And then it's like, where does he go at 2 a.m.? It's just like the trashiest diner he can
Pancakes.
find on his way home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that there is this undercurrent of disdain within the designers of cultural Marxism for normal taste, for broad taste, for
That's exactly
family
right.
values, for normal behavior, for the mid and lowbrow stuff. And that disdain translates later on, if I can like look into the future and correct me if I'm wrong, that disdain for that specialization of oppression, that very fine effete taste for oppression is concentrated. And we have all these different specializations of oppression, just like we have specializations of blueberry tasters and wine tasters. When we get to a later stage of postmodern, intersectional, whatever, we have people that are concentrating on this one very small strain of oppression and trying to figure out how they can get everybody to agree and empower this one oppressed class so that they
That's right.
control everything else.
It's kind of like the whole, like, why do you care about X when Y is happening? And I mean, Helen has such a wonderful argument. Like, she has a few of them. One of them is, just because, Benjamin focuses on this problem doesn't mean that it's not productive for him to focus on that while I focus on this other thing. And another one that she says cuts a little more close to the bone is, you don't have to prove that your building doesn't have rats before you say that other building has cockroaches.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can have rats in your building and see that there's a cockroaches problem in some other building. It's just true. You can. And those can be independent problems, and they both need to be fixed, and they both need to be addressed. And maybe the people who are good at dealing with rats are not good at dealing with cockroaches, and vice versa. And good to have some specialization there. But no, I agree with you. They are people who decided that they had the most refined view of society. They very much, they quote and reference Plato all the time. I apparently say that wrong. People say, I hear you say Plato. Plato. They quote Plato all the time.
Arguments of Plato.
Yes, that's right. Plato. And so they see themselves, I think, very truly as philosopher kings who had figured out, like, that which needs to be. If you read Eros and Civilization, you can kind of get that vibe off of Marcuse very strongly. By the time he writes, that was in 1955, by the time he writes Essay on Liberation in 1969, you can tell he's just like, we need to biologically re-engineer man for liberation. Like, no shit. I have that one open. I could find the line and read it to you. It's like, whoa. He's like, may not be that human beings are biologically ready for liberation yet. We need to change that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Let's remake human beings for your crackpot ideology.
But it seems like hidden under, or a theme is disdain for the common man, disdain for normal systems, disdain for suffering, normal suffering, disdain for anything normal because normal's boring, disdain for everything that's just refined and packaged as revolution. And I might be going a little too far there, but what's the next stage of this Frankfurt School, and how did it change from one to
phase one is where critical theory was defined. Its two kind of probably most important and prominent works would have been Traditional and Critical Theory by Horkheimer in 1937, and then The Dialectic of Enlightenment by Horkheimer with Adorno in 1944. And so then what happened right after 1944, or right around 1944, WWII, right? World War II. Everything changes. So these people, as we have recognized, are Jewish. Germany was not, Frankfurt wasn't really a great place to be for Jewish thinkers in 1940. So they scampered off and they made their way to Geneva and then eventually New York City. And then when they hit the U.S. scene, they basically had a diaspora. They spread out. Some of them stayed at Columbia. Some of them went to work for the federal government. Marcuse, in particular, worked for the federal government. Some of them landed in like UC Berkeley or L.A. or San Diego. So they kind of just spread out across some of the big major universities of the U.S. I mean, Marcuse had appointments at different times at Columbia, at Brandeis, at UCSD, and maybe at Berkeley. I can't recall if he was at Berkeley or not at any point. That might be wrong. Adorno went to Los Angeles, UCLA. So they had to leave. And the character, World War II, of course, was bad. And so that changed the character of what they were doing. And so in the wake of World War II, that's where you start getting Marcuse becoming dominant. In fact, he became the director of the Frankfurt School post-war. after he got done working with the federal government anyway. He worked for I forgot what it's called now, but the precursor to the CIA. And he helped them defeat the Nazis. Total credit for that. Uncredit to him for saying, well, the Nazis had a bad ideology, but a great method for making it mainstream. So let's take their methodology that the brown shirts used and mainstream a good ideology with it, namely mine.
Okay.
So that's not so good. But he did actually, and a lot of people try to defend the Frankfurt School by saying you can't say that they were fascists. They stopped the fascists. No, they stopped one group of fascists. Mm-hmm. They stopped one group. Yeah, the OSS. Yeah, thank you guys. The precursor to the CIA, at any rate, is what people would latch onto today. And so they changed character. And so that's where you start to see Marcuse's writing become more and more relevant. Adorno changes character and almost starts becoming postmodern. He starts writing things like the authoritarian personality, which is where almost everything we know, this is another book that I've really got to go through in detail and start talking about, because a lot of the fundamental characterizations about conservatism and right-wingerness come out of the authoritarian personality. This is why everybody thinks that there's only right-wing authoritarians and left-wingers can't be authoritarian. It's largely because of Adorno's book, The Authoritarian Personality. Marcuse is writing Eros and Civilization, trying to put Marx and Freud together, talking about libidinal urges. And when you see a picture of them and then you read libidinal urges, you're like, ew. I mean,
well, maybe you do.
Ghoulish.
There could be other people out there.
No, everybody does ew.
Okay.
Everybody does ew, except maybe Angela Davis, who was his protege. So ew. And so anyways, in the early 1960s, you have, of course, the civil rights movement is the huge thing. You have the liberation movements arising in the South and Central American and Vietnamese context, et cetera.
Yeah.
That is when all of a sudden the focus on racial minorities starts coming into play. And of course, you've got these feminist critics over here who are kind of getting involved with this and tying into this at that point. And so feminism becomes more relevant again. The feminist Marxists were off kind of in their own orbit, separate from this up until this point. And they started getting involved in the very radical 60s. And so in One Dimensional Man, you can read Marcuse very explicitly saying that the racial minorities this, the racial minorities that. So he's now tying into the racial minorities. He's very, very explicitly saying that they need to form an alliance with the leftist intelligentsia and with the radical outsiders to change society profoundly for liberation. Mm-hmm. Repressive Tolerance is in 65. We've already discussed Repressive Tolerance. Left, good, right, bad is its thesis statement, even if violence is involved.
Is your argument that the radicalism of the 60s is a direct result of European thinkers coming over to America post-World War II and planting their ideas? No. Okay.
No. I am saying that the radicalism of the 60s is what changed the character of the Frankfurt School.
Okay.
To focus on identity-based. So it goes from high culture criticism to identity culture criticism. The criticism remains the same, but it shifts from cultural Marxism to what I think would be better called identity Marxism.
Okay. Which,
and that was
the end goal of that is what? Liberation for everybody.
Goal of that
is there a picture of society? Okay, intersectionality.
It's what we're in now is that identity groups are seen as cultural groups and that they become the site through identity politics for how radical politics are to be defined and done in order to break up the status quo, the so-called status quo, the hegemony of society.
Yeah. I just interviewed.
It was the opposite direction of influence. The 60s influenced the critical theorists.
Okay. And I just interviewed Jack Murphy, and he is in Washington, D.C. I think you guys are connected, but he was talking about the ways in which D.C. charter schools, specifically black charter schools, are segregating themselves. As we both know, as we both covered, there is this tendency to want to push out white people and then to glorify black culture and to denigrate white culture. And so I just see a parallel between Marcuse and Adorno thinking of their culture as the one that everybody should subsume into and glorify. There's these cultural supremacists leanings that are using this critical theory, using these Marxist tools in order to gain hegemony. They say they're against the status quo, but they want their ideology, their culture, etc., their identity as the guiding principle of the status quo.
That's correct. That's correct. And so what happened is that the critical theorists had a foundation of a lot of like tools or weapons, if you will, cultural weapons that they'd already built. And the radical character of the 60s fused onto that or grafted onto that. I mean, you can't say it grafted onto it. I mean, Marcuse took up the liberation movement like full bore. Most of the postmodernists participated in the 1968 liberation riots in May of 1968, the student revolt. So they were involved as well. These things were what was happening, and it all kind of like radical left thought started to all form into this one thing at the time. So all of a sudden you have these kind of very identity radical based people like the Marxist feminists, for example. No. Third phase is irrelevant.
Oh.
Third phase is Marcuse dies. This is in the 70s. Jürgen Habermas is in charge. Nobody cares what he's talking about. It's softer. It's more nobody cares. It's just this kind of like cultural complaining that sounds more intellectual. And this offshoot, this very radical identity politics offshoot in the 1970s becomes the dominant strain of critical theory without being really identified as being critical theory. This has become identity Marxism, has grown out of this thing, taken off on its own, whereas the critical theory school is over here with Jürgen Habermas, like performative contradiction, not to downplay. I think some of Habermas is all right. I don't know it very well, but it's not relevant. It's just milquetoast, lame, like let's soften up what we were doing. We got too radical, and it's not relevant to the problem of today. Very little of Habermas. In fact, much of Habermas, like performative contradiction, undermines what's going on here. Like Peter Boghossian's brought that up a bajillion times, that you can't, the quintessential example of a performative contradiction, which is a Habermas concept, is using reason to saw off reason. There's that old cartoon I said saw because there's a guy, he's on the tree limb and he's sawing his own limb off, and it's the reason limb. Mm-hmm. Using reason to denigrate reason, making a truth claim that there is no truth. It's a performative contradiction. And so the third phase of the Frankfurt School is kind of like the Frankfurt School going off into its own quiet good night, while these radicals just start running rampant. And this is where in the mid-1970s you end up with Marcuse on TV talking to, what's his name, something McGee, Brian McGee maybe, saying the anti-intellectual nature of the movement that I started is just out of control. They're not doing what we wanted them to do. They're not responsible. I see it in some regard as the radicals took over, and they took these radical philosophers' ideas and just dropped the philosopher side. In other words, we can go back to Horkheimer, phase one, and say, look, you split traditional and critical theory. And I've said this many times. Traditional theory is harder than critical theory. It's easy to complain. Traditional theory is harder. It's very hard to get things right. And so eventually you're going to run into the situation where anti-intellectuals pick up the critical theory tool without recognizing that traditional theory is still necessary. Marcuse, for any evil that you want to throw at him, for anything you want to say, was not a dumb guy. He was a very smart, very intellectual, very scholastically talented philosopher. There's no way you can say that he's not. You can say he's evil. I agree with that. You can say that he's misguided. I would agree with that. You can say that he had terrible ideas. I would agree with that. But you can't say that he was an anti-intellectual. Right? But then the people that went in his wake, e.g. Angela Davis, his own student, not terribly intellectual people. And these radicals ran off with these tools, and they have no interest in doing traditional theory whatsoever. All they want to do is the critical theory. All they want to do is the tear down stuff side. They don't want to do the explain how it actually is side. These are all this is one way that you could see that is that they bred and reared a dragon, and the dragon learned to fly, and the dragon flew away from the Frankfurt School, and the Frankfurt School was irrelevant after that. And poor Habermas can do his critical theory, and the people with him can do their critical theory. So phase 3 of the Frankfurt School is irrelevant because you've now had the Combahee River Collective beginning in 1977 creating it's like that's the seed of woke. Finally, like, what is it called when a seed pops open and the root comes out and the little sprout comes above the ground? Germination, I guess. That's the germination of the woke movement right there.
And they leave behind the shell that encased them beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. And that's Habermas saying, that's a performative contradiction, guys. In his very Rick Moranis. I'm sure he has a very Rick Moranis voice. I don't know what his voice. Guys, it's very Rick Moranis. Guys, that would be a bad idea.
It seems like there's a seed of something to counter that in your attitude towards the burger. Like there's this way of interacting with high and low culture, high and low people that it doesn't highlight.
Appreciate what's in front of you for what it is.
Yeah. And
just enjoy. Like I can love me a gourmet burger. If it's good, they can also suck though. Like you paid $28 for that burger, doesn't mean that burger's good. There's an $8 burger
like
waiting
a paddle
for
or
you
something,
that's way better. Yeah. Smash burgers are awesome. I don't know, like those are total. Like your stomach will tell you later. Those are slum burgers. Smash burgers, great. Like it's like $10. You paid like 20. I was at a thing at a hotel and I had to get lunch, and I went down and I'm looking at the menu and I'm like, oh god. And I get the burger after tip and whatever. It's $32 for a burger. Turns out it was okay. Can you be honest about the fact that you paid $32 for a not very good burger? Like it was overdone. What kind? It's Wagyu beef, so Wagyu or whatever. It's like, oh, so it's got to be good, right? No, it wasn't that good. Mm-hmm. Well, it was okay.
Well, yeah, you were trapped though in a hotel. So what are you gonna do?
I mean, it was 4 Seasons. What are you gonna do? You should have get the steak frites. Is what you do. Costs the same. Steak frites.
And smother them in some Heinz, which you can trust. I wonder if I can just look at I'm scrolling through our tip thing.
Somebody said they want to see the saber.
James,
I don't know.
Out the
can't make this fit on the camera.
You know what? Maybe it's the sword that's been giving us noise the whole time. It acts like an antenna.
Is it?
Oh, sorry if I missed anybody's.
My antenna is over large.
Oh, okay. I did want to bring up this. There is this. There's this George Orwell wrote about socialists at some point.
Playing with my big sword.
George Carlin or George Orwell?
No, Carlin is in the chat. Carlin is great. Carlin noticed that I was playing with my giant sword, and she says she has to see herself out, and it's totally understandable. It's a thing that happens all the time. It is not a falchion. It is a dao. It is a bagua dao. It is a Chinese sword. It is also not a freaking scimitar. Scimitars are way more curved than that.
James.
Derek, it's a thing. I just showed you my dao, jock. I am not compensating, Michael. It's compensating for me.
What was your big lesson from the anti-Semitic?
My wife laughed when I said it's compensating for me. Take that as you will. I heard her from the other room. She's still laughing.
She has a sense of humor.
She knows. She knows the truth.
Did you learn anything from the anti-Semitic interactions that or the label that you attained? And do you think you shook it off?
I don't care about the label. It's bullshit. So what I learned is that, it's like, I don't remember which prominent person said it. Maybe it was Brett Weinstein, I think, said it. When you have something like that happen to you, you really learn who are your like fair weather friends, who are your real friends, who are your fake friends, who are opportunists, who will rip your ass just because they're opportunists.
Yeah.
And I'm not really a list kind of guy, but I'm also not a stupid kind of guy. So I have mental lists now of who's in which category. There were people who definitely should have come to my defense who didn't. I know who they are. There were people who came to my defense who I didn't expect, and I am glad to have new friends, et cetera, et cetera. The label's bullshit. I hope the New York Times writes the piece. Everybody will like clutch their pearls and freak out. You did damage to the thing. No, I also forced a conversation. The conversation needs to be happening because we're at a dangerous time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're at a dangerous time. But yeah, So I don't know. If we want to talk more about Frankfurt School, we can talk about Benjamin and the roots of lived experience if you want. That's from the
Oh,
1930s also.
lived experience. I flirted with Benjamin for a bit. I can't remember anything. I don't have your memory. I don't know how you keep this all filed and stacked in your gray matter.
You should have saw it before I had the head injury, man. It was
Oh,
something. I used to really be smart.
oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah,
That
I
was a
broke my
surprise.
brain.
Have we
Yeah,
talked
Walter
about
Benjamin.
that
That's right.
trauma? No. Okay.
Have I talked? I've talked about it before. I was doing
Okay.
pull-ups, and I was doing like superstar pull-ups where you pull yourself up and then you lift your body and touch the ceiling with your feet, and then you go
Okay.
down and you pull up and then you touch. And I was doing those, and managed to have too much momentum and dislodged the pull-up bar from the door frame at the top while I was at the top and horizontal, so 7 feet off the ground, and I fell onto the back of my head onto a concrete slab
Okay.
and cracked the back of my skull. That was in 2011. I still
Okay.
have things from that, but I even lost my like prelude to COVID. I lost my sense of taste and smell for like 2 years. I talked about it on Rogan, so like people have heard
It's out
about
there.
it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
people
I
have
didn't.
heard
I
about it.
didn't hear that.
Like I
I
got
don't.
real pissed off the other day, and actually, like there's weird air pressure things that happen in my head. I'm pretty sure one of these days I'm going to die from it.
Okay.
Um, and it happened again just
Okay.
because I got pissed off.
So it dumbed you down enough for us to understand
My
you.
memory doesn't work the same way. I think I'm
Okay.
sharp analytically, but my memory doesn't work like it used to.
Huh. Okay.
Um, yeah, memory
So
used to be way better.
this is your lived experience.
Correct. So Benjamin, and I don't know if this is actually the root. So it's difficult because the postmodernists have their own root to it, right? Like Foucault and Derrida were very suspicious of the influence of discourses, and so that the unmediated lived experience where you don't have, like Derrida is all about the infinite deferral of meaning, so you don't find meaning in language. So where if you can't find it in language, where do you find it? You find it in experience. So
Hmm.
you have that aspect there. You also see it apparently in Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. She's talking about the experience of being a woman,
Yeah.
and it's definitely clear that she's building up the idea of lived experience.
Hmm.
But there's actually apparently a discussion, and I've only read a little bit of it, in 37, 6, 3 maybe, I don't know, 30 something, where Walter Benjamin is talking about, I mean, he wrote actually a lot going all the way back to before the Frankfurt School existed in like 1913, writing about experience, lots of essays about experience. He's very interested in the concept of experience. This is also derived from Husserl, whose philosophy I don't know yet. I guess I'll probably have to learn it. He was very interested in the nature of experience, and
Hmm.
so these Frankfurt School guys, being Hegelian, brought phenomenology to the table within experience. So they were the kind of the first people to really look at it phenomenologically. And Benjamin had this long explanation of the two different kinds of experience. You have like the kind of experiences that you have every day, like you're walking. He said, in fact, they called them, what is it? Choke. It's German. Shock. Air. I don't know. I don't know German. It's like ERLIBNIS or something like that. I can kind of picture the word in my head.
Okay.
Yeah, but you have these you have shock experiences every day in modern society. There's so many people. You're out in a crowd. There's all this stuff happening. You go to a movie. There's all these things changing around you all the time. People are shouting. Things are going on. And he says that this creates an impossibility to derive that which we think of as like experience that you can draw from. Your life is so chaotic from all of these things that are happening around you that you can't create a base of experience that you can interpret and understand your life. That's his kind of argument.
Hmm.
So he uses two different German words to talk about the idea of experience. In particular, I actually have the part of the essay here. Let me see. So Erlebnis is, I don't know how to say German words, so I'm saying it wrong, I'm sure. Schock-Erlebnis or Schock-Erlebnis, CHOCK, and then Erlebnis. And then Erfahrung, ERFAHRUNG. It becomes a different type of experience, and that's the experience that you like draw from. I've had that experience. I know, looking back to experience, I understand what's going on in my life. So he has these two things, and he says that there's so many experiences, we're having so many experiences constantly that we can't create kind of a narrative of or a sense of gaining experience in a thing. And that's his critique that he's writing. And he says that it's, of course, modern consumer society that produces this problem, and advanced society that produces this problem. So it's kind of this hearkening back to this. We would almost say it's like the city's all hustle, bustle, fast pace. And then, we could put it in terms of Green Acres, I guess, right? Fresh air, Times Square, And then, of course, that song ends, "You Are My Wife, Goodbye, City Life." We all know how that ended. Sorry, Jaja, you got to go to the farm. The man said so. But anyway, I mean, that's kind of what he's talking about, though. The slow-paced rural life, or slow-paced pre-industrial life, versus the cacophony of experiences that never give you true experience in modern industrial or urban life. And these kind of got derived down to experience versus lived experience. And lived experience becomes that which is set into like a theoretical model that helps you make sense of all of these things. People are putting German words that nobody can say now in the
I
chat.
think I see some Japanese too.
Well, no, that's Chinese. So that's Bagua Dao. Bagua something Dao. I forgot what that one character means. I can almost read, but yeah, Bagua Dadao. It's Bagua Dadao. Is what it says.
I'll put it
8
on the screen.
trigram big knife. Those are the 4 characters.
There you go. It's on the screen. So Benjamin is saying that there's a fast-paced experience, though.
You're Benjamin.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I can't do it either.
No, I'm Benjamerican. I'm not a German, but he was German.
Yeah.
And Benjamin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Benjamin.
So there's these two different kinds of experience. I was thinking about mapping that onto right now. There's online and offline life. There's you just slowly cooking your freaking dinner, not a thought in your head, sweeping the room. And then there's you on Twitter, where it's like everything's are banging around and you're just filled with
correct.
Bing, 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 and you can't actually
No,
build
I'm usually like
true
the
container
slow
experience.
when I'm on Twitter, and then it's fast when I go into my DMs and I'm getting messages faster than I can possibly keep up with them, which is my normal everyday experience, like literally thousands of DMs a day, trying to keep up with them. But then if I'm actually like thinking through and doing a thread or staring at like responses or whatever, it's not like that. Mm-hmm. So those are the varieties of Twitter experience. I should write a book. So yes, and I understand where he's coming from, right? You can't read these guys and say, "Oh, I don't understand where they're coming from at all. It's totally nonsense." They have an excellent critique of fascism. They have an excellent critique of the challenges of transitioning to more urban and modern life. But then to just say, capitalist society ruined everything. Like, we're not adaptable enough as a species to figure out how. Like, we have tons of things that they would have hated, like television and movies and so on, that have helped us learn to contextualize all of that stuff at speed. Your average person like myself, I went to Manhattan for the first time in my life a couple of years ago. And it was just like, having that experience, like, whoa, And then there are people who live there, though. You live there for a little while, and even if you just stay there for like 4 or 5 days, you're like, how do people live any other way than this? If you talk to somebody who's lived in Manhattan, they all say it. They're like, I don't know how you live. I would never want to live somewhere else now. Maybe it's changed now that the crime rate is like up, but supposing certain things are in order. So it's like they're almost assuming this. It's almost like Luddites, right? It's like they're assuming this lack of ability for people to adapt to what's going on. Yeah. Much more interesting is actually the conflict that we run into with people who adapt to city life versus people who don't, who have two extremely different views of the world, which is what we see happening now. Kind of the red-blue split, we call it in the U.S. or whatever, but rural versus urban.
Would you think that Benjamin or any of the thinkers that you've discussed would have some sort of bridge between city life and country life, between the red and the blue, between these two radical different stories? Do you think that there's anything within the Frankfurt School or critical theory or postmodernism that would help us translate these two? stances.
Yes,
into a
but
homogeneous
you have to realize it's like you
dialectical.
have to understand the thing you're reading to be able to derive value from it, right?
Yeah.
You have to understand that I just talked about in this podcast I recorded for New Discourses, or for I guess my only subs private podcast, subscriber only podcast, only subs. Do what I say, subs. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that kind of subs.
Oh no.
Your safe word is yes, please.
More.
No, it's not that kind of subs.
More, damn it.
I just talked about that though. I said something about how Robin DiAngelo is white fragility describes very correctly an important psychological phenomenon and social phenomenon. A very
defensiveness?
No, it's kind of a complicated thing. I don't want to spoil my own podcast, but I'll spoil it anyway.
No.
You get caught in a potential well. I was actually talking about the backfire effect, right? You've heard of the backfire effect, the psychological backfire effect. So you don't believe in vaccines or something, and then I try to tell you vaccines are okay, and here are the facts, and now you come away being even more anti-vax as a result. Mm-hmm. And so it turns out that there's almost like a psychological potential well that you get trapped in when you adhere to an ideology or something. And she is very correctly describing how hard it is to get out of that position when you're in one. But she's misattributing it to being white, whereas being caught in your own worldview is a different thing, right?
Yeah.
It's very hard to get out of your worldview. I'm actually in the podcast, trying not to spoil my podcast, but in the podcast, I actually talked about how people who become woke often don't. Why it's difficult for them to see the problems that wokeness causes. Like, why they're not able to see like blatant racism happening as a result of wokeness, neo-racism, if you want, and they're unable to see this as bad. Mm-hmm. And the question is why? Why can they not see that this is? I actually got asked by a rabbi, because they're all talking to me now.
Wow.
I got asked, why can't people see that so much of critical race theory is warmed over Nazi ideology? It's just Nazi ideology reappropriated and warmed over. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
it goes back to that misappropriation where Robin DiAngelo has a good idea, but she somehow mixes that with identity. And then because she does that, that idea is gangbusters and she becomes a multi-million-dollar speaker and author and stuff like that.
Correct. And that's what she's done. She's misattributed a correct psychological phenomenon that she's described exquisitely well. And part of the reason that it goes as viral as it does is because it's so freaking offensive the way that she actually frames it out that people react to it and it blows up.
And then people internalize it too. Yeah.
The truth is that you do get caught. Like, you can think of a woke person unable to see that wokeness is bad, and when you challenge them and they react in certain ways, you're like, wow, you could call that woke fragility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And so what I actually describe is that. So Robin DiAngelo is touching a thing correctly. The Frankfurt School guys are too. You just have to understand what they're misattributing. All right. So that was our point. Can we derive something from the Frankfurt School as of value? Their critique of fascism is excellent. But their critique of fascism being excellent has to apply to what has come out of their own work. You have to turn the critique back on them because they now have the hegemonic power. Mm-hmm. You have to remember that they are constantly writing in the context that capitalist and consumer society are inherently bad and something we need to be liberated from, which is not true. It is not true. What these people, in some sense, are ultimately mad about is that, so you have this, Marx writing about this conflict between capitalism, and then the answer to capitalism is supposed to be socialism. Capitalism has all these abuses. You look at, industrial capitalism in its age, the pollution, the company towns, the abuses, child labor, the whole thing, like people dying in factories and like working 18-hour days and under a whip, basically. It's not good. And then what happened was we figured out, it's a false dichotomy. It's not capitalism or socialism. It's not high culture or low culture. We can blend them. We can have blended economies where there are social elements and there are also mostly a capitalist engine. We can blend them. There's low culture, stupid cartoons with a duck, where all the background music is classical. We can blend them, right?
Yeah.
With a duck running around with a guy with a hat who stutters shooting. No, he has baby talk. Sorry, it's a pig that stutters. But you have Elmer Fudd running around with a gun trying to shoot cartoon ducks and getting foiled, and cartoon Daffy Duck, who's very daffy as it turns out, and Bugs Bunny, who's very bugsy, sawing Florida off into the ocean and every other thing, because who wants Florida? Although it's the best place in the country now. And then set to all the proper high culture classical music that Adorno wanted. Yeah. And maybe what the hell? Let's throw a little jazz in there sometimes. Yeah, why not?
Just to
so they figured out ways to blend high culture and low culture into a middle culture. They figured out ways to blend social economies and capitalist economies, and most importantly, to regulate the monopolistic behaviors, the trust behaviors that were causing the abuses of capitalism. These guys are like, you stole our revolution. And that's what they're actually mad at. Yeah. And they're mad at the rise of the middle class. And if you understand the context in which they're writing, and therefore that they're importantly wrong, yeah, their critique of fascism is excellent. Some of their critiques of capitalism and the way that, consumerism in particular are excellent. And yeah, they're good food for thought. So I don't want to give them short shrift. The problem is when you get to stuff like repressive tolerance, idiotic prescriptions like right bad, left good. Even when we use violence, like he even says in there somewhere, I should look it up and read it to you, where he literally says, when has history cared about ethics or something like that? It's like, it's always unethical.
That's a justification for him to
use violence,
suspend ethics for the correct cause.
He says, in terms of historical function, there is a difference between revolutionary and reactionary violence. There's no other kinds, though, I guess, right? There's a difference between revolutionary and reactionary violence, between violence practiced by the oppressed and by the oppressors. In terms of ethics, both forms of violence are inhuman and evil. Look how high-minded I am. In terms of ethics, both forms of violence are inhuman and evil. But since when is history made in accordance with ethical standards? That's literally what he says.
It seems like there's so many great thoughts built on such bad assumptions. Like when you look at the bad behavior,
of the game here.
When you look at the bad behavior, like that's obviously bad, and then you're like, well, here's all the high-minded ideas, and like, well, it has to lead to something. You're like, oh, it's an equally bad starting point leads to a bad end point. And it seems like anybody who's too invested in justice or being on the right side of history can't afford, in a way, to look at the outcome or the income of their high-minded thoughts. They're in that bubble between those two things, and they disregard the ends.
Eve is killing it over here in the chat too. Eve has pointed out that that's straight Machiavellianism, and it sure is. Awesome. Yeah, it's, you have to like the amount of like tongue in cheek. So we talked before, right? We did the postmodern Jedi. Yeah. Man, I am so much warmer to the postmodernists than I am to these people.
That's what I wanted to ask you. So the critical theory came along and postmodern came over here. They weren't really related when you were relating.
They didn't like each other.
Oh, they didn't like each other.
You can't say that they're not related at all. Okay. Because they were certainly aware of each other. And certainly the postmodernists coming later would have been aware of the critical theorists. And like I said, if you try to read, because it's extraordinarily hard to read, Theodor Adorno, Critical Theory, Frankfurt School, his book Dialectic of Enlightenment, which I think is 1966. So that's about the same time that Foucault and Derrida are writing a lot of their stuff, right? I think Derrida published 3 books in 1937, of grammatology being one of them. I'm almost positive it was 67. I would have to check the date. But he published 3 books that year. It's insane, that guy's output. Dialectic of Enlightenment. Sorry, I said Dialectic of Enlightenment. I didn't mean that. I mean negative dialectics. Negative dialectic is 1966. Is virtually impossible to read, but it's also so similar to postmodernism that you can see these guys are tipping into the same lines of thought. Negative dialectic. So I don't know how deep do we want to go, Benjamin? Into
5 feet.
What this is about? 5 feet.
Meters.
Okay, so
between 5 feet and 5 meters.
So Hegel lays out this dialectical process deriving off of Kant. Okay, so Kant said thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Right. So you have a statement, you have its antithesis, And then you try to find a way that they're kind of both true, and you synthesize them into some higher view. This was Kant. Hegel took this slightly differently. I forget how he lays it out exactly because Hegel's unreadable, but it's something like abstract and then concrete and then synthesis or something like that. It's not quite right. But it's roughly usually still attributed that the dialectical process has these three stages. Somebody puts forth an idea, that's a thesis. You give its negation, its Aufheben in German, that's its antithesis. And then you try to find the synthesis that brings it together into some new higher order. The best example of this I saw on Twitter, of all things, is that the dialectical process would be, I say the sky is blue, right? And you say a proper negation of that would be, no, it's not. No, it's red. No, it's green. You would say, not at night.
Okay.
And then you're like, oh, there's a bigger reality to the sky. It's blue.
Topic.
Nuancification. Sure. Yeah, it's garbage is mostly. But anyway, negative dialectic. Adorno's idea was, no, don't do that. Do not synthesize. Thesis, antithesis, leave at particulars.
What do you mean leave at particulars?
So you reduce to the particulars. So here's an example that I think is right, but it's, again, try to read this book. It's virtually impossible. It's as hard as Derrida. But I think that it's the same kind of thing that Derrida was arguing. So in my living room, I have this big round wooden table, right? Not huge, but it's a nice wooden table. Mm-hmm. I also have this small, funky copper-topped coffee table that's shaped kind of like almost like the Star Trek symbol, but more triangular. Okay, right? Yeah. It's curved on one side, but three sides at any rate. And then I have like a little kitchen island thing that's obviously different, and it's square. It's taller, so you have these three things, or three different heights, or three different shapes, or made of three different things. The kitchen island is like this solid set of cabinets down to the floor, and it's on wheels. The table has four legs. The coffee table that's triangular has three legs. They're obviously very different objects, right? But we would say table, and it applies to all of them.
Yeah.
And so that, in some sense, it'd be like thesis would be table, and then antithesis would be they're different. And then Adorno would say, leave it. Don't try to resolve. Don't try to explain how they're all tables. Leave it. Leave it at the particular. That thing is that thing. That thing is that thing. That thing is that thing. I even kind of spoke to a very positive aspect of that where we were talking about the burgers earlier, is like appreciate the thing for what it is. Yeah. Is like the positive aspect of that. So it's kind of like sort of the thing, right? Appreciate the thing for what it is. But the negative dialectic is just a process of tearing down. It actually anticipates or mirrors deconstruction, although it's very unlikely. And in fact, I think it's not the case that Adorno and Derrida would have been in communication at the time, Derrida being probably in Paris and Adorno certainly in Los Angeles at the time. And Derrida was not famous in the US yet, so he would not have been coming over here. But it's essentially the same thing as deconstruction. It more or less, the idea is you show the contradiction, the thesis antithesis contradiction, and you don't try to resolve it. You don't try to find a synthesis. You take everything apart to its particulars. So you see that happening in, the Frankfurt school as well. But I'm not a huge fan of Derrida, frankly. But when you look at like Foucault and Lyotard within the postmodern tradition, that was like the question, right? I find a lot in Baudrillard. I find, as much as I still think that they're dangerously wrong, I find a lot to appreciate about their critique of social power. And a lot that applies right now, like Foucault's whole damn thing about science and things be like the rule of science, biopolitics or
biopower.
Power. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
COVID. Has anybody read or seen our COVID policy? Listen to the science. What the hell do you think that is? Foucault warned us about that so clearly.
Okay. To kind of concretize that, the way that science is being bandied about within the political sphere of causing people to behave certain ways is not really about science. It's not actual science. Science is being used as a code word to enforce an authority, to enforce
That's right.
a particular outcome.
That's right.
And that's basically
That's
what
exactly
Foucault is saying, is that we
right.
have these language games that are masks for power, and that they appropriate certain authority from I guess science has a lot of authority because it's produced a lot of good effects, but it's borrowing that authority. The New York Times has a bunch of authority because it built up itself as the paper of record, and now it's being spent for something that has nothing to do with what actually gave it the authority in the first place.
Correct. And so when you read Baudrillard's analysis of like hyper-reality and simulation and simulacra, or simulacra and simulation, I should say, it's like, wow, this really touches the experience that we have in our now, socially mediated world. You read Lyotard's legitimation by parology, which is finding truth through consensus.
Yeah.
So all the jet-setting blue checks, all the very smart people say, nope, it's really this way. Yeah. That's their consensus. So that's James is an anti-Semite. That's what he said. So it's true, and we now have to go along with that. That's the legitimation process.
Yeah.
Everybody that has anything to say is saying it.
There's this video that popped up yesterday from I don't know the exact context, but there was an ACLU lawyer that was arguing for transgender women in sports. And one of the council members or somebody posed a question: if a female sports team is completely stocked with every single member of that female sports team is a transgender biological male, is that okay with you? Or, what about that? What if that is the outcome? And she couldn't answer that. She's like, trans women are women. Trans girls are girls, so we have to go along with it. And you could tell, even though her face is messed up, that she's like panicking, and she's like, I have nothing to do but to conform to this consensus reality. The consensus reality is reality.
Right. That's where Baudrillard's calling this hyper reality. That's where Lyotard's saying legitimation by parology. So their analyses, although broken in other ways and in other places, have a lot to offer to what's happening right now.
And do they give us the tools to break what they're doing?
Yes, totally.
Which is what? How do you return to reality through deconstructing? And
I don't know how you return to reality. I just know how you break what they're doing.
Okay.
I actually think that there is, if you're willing to admit realism, and you're also willing to cobble onto it. So, reality exists and we can know something about it. Mm-hmm. Realism to get started through whether empirical. So I'll be generous to our religious friends too. Religious people often do this through exegesis, textual analysis. What was the authorial intent, for example? What is the book trying to say? Mm-hmm. Or if it's the Catholic tradition, maybe it's what is the succession of popes, commentary, what can you divine from this? What can you understand from this? But in terms of kind of the scientific side of the question, what does nature tell us? We're going to go to the experiment and we're just going to let the chips fall where they may, to the best of our ability. And we will be content to say, I don't know, when it's not clear, we don't know how to design the experiment or whatever it is. If you're willing to accept that basis of realism, and then you're willing to take Foucault's analysis of criticism of social power, and in particular, like a refinement of what we were just saying about Foucault. Somebody put this on Twitter, and I don't remember who it was, but I wish I could give them credit because it was really well put. And I don't quite have it, so I'm going to butcher it a bit. But it was that essentially what happens is once you have a process, like a system, like becoming credentialed, mm-hmm. and getting awards and all of this, what happens is that scientists' own self-interest becomes a competing variable against finding truth. And therefore you have that invitation to corruption there, and that thing can sometimes get out of control. And that's kind of the thing that Foucault's warning about, is that when that gets too empowered, when that gets too connected to state power, for example, or to large amounts of social power or social consensus, then you have this problem where those competing interests gaining another, Nobel Prize, or gaining another departmental award or whatever, start to outweigh the pursuit for truth. And this, of course, is a thing. This is why you had Wolfgang Pauli warning that physics proceeds one funeral at a time in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the human element is there. In some sense, Foucault was warning that human element not only is there, but can get out of control. If you read his actual lectures on biopower from, those were like, what, 78 or something, 70, they're pretty late. He died in 83 or four, I think, of AIDS, which he thought was a social construct to control gays. So he wasn't right about everything. Yeah, well, good old Foucault.
Yeah.
If you read his essays on biopower, though, he's actually quite warm to the idea that if we're going to have something that's leading us, science is actually, probably better. However, here are ways where it can get out of whack. And he starts talking about Stalin. He starts talking about Hitler. He starts talking about basically taking these highly techno-fascist, for the technology of the day, regimes. Technocracy is really the thing that he's warning us about, is rule by experts, because the experts themselves are corruptible things. And if you link that to science too firmly, you can start running yourself down some really dangerous roads. Yeah. And so that's where Feynman's observation I put on Twitter not that long ago, that, science is in general, like simplifying it to the extreme, to copy Lyotard, science could be said to be an incredulity toward experts. It's the belief that experts themselves are not infallible. Experts are in fact fallible, corruptible individuals. And so the process that Jonathan Rauch described as each checking each, or whatever, no final say, no special authority, is the thing that has to be preserved and has to be pushed and has to matter. Because, as my mom texted me, my mom hates Fauci now, as I think many Americans do. My mom texted me the other day because I had the flu a couple weeks ago, and she said, "Did you send your symptoms to Fauci? He always has an answer."
How many masks, Fauci?
And then she sent me a picture of Fauci wearing like 30 masks, a Photoshop picture, and said, and what was her comment? I put it on Twitter. It's so funny. I was tears streaming down my face laughing over this. She said, "He's always right," or something. No, he has a plan. And then she showed him with like 30 masks. That's, my mom. That's right. My mom is hilarious. She is a special lady. So a lot of people are sick of this, because what they see is somebody who, whatever his scientific background or chops, is a bureaucrat now. And he's pushing bureaucratic bullshit. The guy who created the PCR test, if you ever seen the interview with him before he died right before COVID started. How weird. He did an interview, and he basically talked about how Fauci is kind of a game player and a pencil pusher and paper pusher or whatever else. And he has, no love for the guy. That's what he's become, right? And he was wrong on a lot of very important issues in that role, because public pressure, et cetera, keeping your cushy, cool job it's a competing interest. And that's a threat. That's always a threat.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Then you have the real threat is when a tyrannical project has decided to take on the imprimatur of science as its shield.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good way of putting it. Tyrannical project, because it is diffuse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I actually had in mind, Lysenkoism, Stalin, right? When I was thinking, Lysenko was Soviet biology. Yeah. That was a tyrannical project, Stalinism, using Lysenko as a bogus biologist, to holding that up, and then putting in the gulag other scientists, or just shooting them, who were like, "That's not going to work. We're all going to starve." They turned out to be right. Hitler had a tyrannical project. There are other tyrannical projects that have come and gone, and there are tyrannical projects in the world today, some of which may or may not succeed. Some of which are right wing and some of which are left wing. For sure. I mean, we have a great big one that everybody knows about that just had a new year. They have a tyrannical project going on there. Xinyin Kuai-la.
Okay. I don't have the characters to type that out. If you want to type that out in chat, I can put that on the screen. But I don't know if you have a Chinese keyboard handy.
I don't. I can't. Yeah. I don't know. I can read a handful of characters. I can't. I'm not good at Chinese. My Mandarin suffers.
And we suffer for it, James.
That's good. We all should start practicing it, though. It's a good time to practice your Mandarin.
Beijing Biden.
Yeah. You guys know what the song playing at the beginning of Temple of Doom in Shanghai is, right?
I don't
Anything
remember
goes.
that movie.
Anything goes.
I can't remember that movie at all.
You've never seen Temple of Doom?
I've seen it, but I
You're older than me. You have to have seen it.
Well, I'm barely older than you, but no, I have seen it, but like we didn't watch it over and over again like we did the third one, Last Crusade. Last Crusade.
Well, that was the best. Yeah, because
I think it was the best one.
The cup and Sean Connery and the whole thing, and yeah,
we named the dog Indiana.
That was pretty good.
Well, yeah, we.
No, I can do Jordan Peterson. I can't do Sean
Connery. Oh, you can do Jordan Peterson?
Yeah.
Do you want? Should we find a? Do you want to find a comment and like let somebody?
We need a very Jordan Peterson thing to say, and I haven't done it in a while, so it's probably going to be rusty and come off more like Kermit.
What are some of the interesting cons? I mean, you're on the edge of discourse constantly. You're always playing and messing around with ideas. What are some new developing territory that we've yet to map in our space of talking about these things? I asked this of Konstantin Kisin the other day, and he said, well, free speech is over. I'm like, yeah. And then, McWhorter comes out with anti-racism as new religion. I'm like, we've been talking about that for years over here. I want to be on the avant-garde. Where's the next line?
Well, I mean, so, McWhorter's coming out with religion. I don't mean to, it's a superficial analysis. There's a very deep analysis. I don't think it's going to be popular because it requires learning a bit of Hegel to understand it. And I think it's very interesting, but I don't think it will be big, and I don't think it'll be popular. The thing that the avant-garde, the front line, is going to be figuring out how to have as I'm referring to, a steel-spined liberalism, a liberalism that will stay liberal while standing up to this. It will recognize that the woke fall outside of that which Karl Popper warned us about in the paradox of tolerance, and therefore have to be resisted intolerantly, but with the objective of maintaining a liberal order and liberal values. That's a positive thing to do too. It's building that movement in that regard.
Yeah.
The thing to be talking about right now is no longer free speech. It's asymmetry. It's not brand new, but it is the topic of the moment.
Keep on bringing it up. Yeah. I think there's an idea in that
comment.
Oh, you got one?
JBP sounding.
Wait, where? The one in all caps?
You are where being manifests itself, and that's pretty damn important. You are where being manifests itself, and that's pretty damn important.
Do it again.
I don't want to say the same one again.
Okay. I can't find it. Read the name of the person who wrote it so I can put it on the screen so people can interpret what you're saying.
I don't know how to say Eve's last name. It's Eve Kanainen, I think.
She's great.
She is great. She's great. We used to be at such odds back in the atheism day when people cared about that stuff.
Yeah.
You can type Chinese with an English keyboard if you have the right software installed. You can type it in Pinyin and it'll pop up in a small context menu with the possible matching characters.
Sounds like he's in Glee Club or something.
I mean, I used to do it, but they were all really inappropriate things that I said in his voice. And so all the ones I practiced the most were really inappropriate. We don't know if it's okay that women have jobs, stuff like that. Like, just really, like, it's only been 50 years that we let women out of the house, stuff like that. It's like, I was totally strawmanning what he's saying, but it was stuff he was saying. So,
I mean, I wish I interviewed you back in the atheism days.
Yeah, well,
before this whole thing broke.
Nobody interviewed me. Not many.
No, I reached out to you about a year before so-called Squared broke.
I don't intend to give up my day job, Dawn. Yeah, I told you it used to be better. I used to practice it, and then it was like he gets sick. You can't make fun of people who get sick.
Yeah, I know.
And so I just started doing like, why are there so many songs about rainbows? And what's on the other side? One day we'll find it. The rainbow connection. The lovers, the dreamers, and me. Yeah, so I just kind of retreated to Kermit.
Yeah.
But you just
that's what you have to do.
Be Kermit and like angry dad. If you can do Kermit and you can be an angry dad, Like, just think about how mad you are at your stupid kids, and then do Kermit voice, and you're Jordan Peterson. And put a little bit of Canadian in there. You have to put a little Canadian shine on it.
So
you gotta say like go oat side, not oot. It's not oot. It's oat. Time.
Have you spoken with Peterson yet? You guys got something in the works?
I did a podcast with him right after the Grievance Studies affair, and I have not talked to him in a very long time.
Okay. Yeah.
I haven't talked. We need to probably chat because he's like kind of coming back. He says he doesn't have the stamina, and I kind of get it because like he got wrecked.
Yeah, you can tell.
But people are really trying to push it.
Yeah.
That he and I talk.
Him and Brett will talk soon.
Power clean your room, bucko. Yeah. Anyway, it's not as good as your Connery. Your Connery was like pretty spot on.
Let me see if there's a Connery. Because you're dumb. Because they're dumb.
Stay away from the hemlock.
Where's your whole sentence? Wait, here we go.
Yeah, sound like Kermit
I was really saying that to slap a woman was not the crudest thing that you can do to her. I said that in my book. It's much more cruel to psychologically damage somebody they want to smack. Maximus Groves.
There you go.
I didn't go all the way out. I got something.
That was pretty good though.
He passed away. Sean Connery. He slapped women.
He did. Well, he got COVID. Everybody got COVID.
Oh, everybody got COVID. You got COVID. I haven't got COVID.
I got the flu.
On an island. Oh,
I got the flu. I didn't get COVID. Okay. I got tested. Well, I don't know, because I got it after Biden got inaugurated. So
it doesn't count.
New president, new test. Who knows? It's not clear what I actually. No,
formerly known as COVID.
I'm pretty sure it was the flu. It felt like the flu.
I think that there's a way to make an argument that the woke don't like hamburgers. Everybody's got a hamburger that they like, right? And there's a place in the middle. There's really lowbrow hamburger. There's a highbrow hamburger. There's people, there's things that are so specialized like blue cheese with, some sort of snail pate hamburger. Nobody wants to touch that except for very elite people. But like the taste of this movement, this authoritarian movement, doesn't even want to participate in culture. Doesn't want to take a break and eat a hamburger with friends.
Bugs, Ben. Eat your bugs. Eat your bugs and like it.
There's something anti-culture about it.
It is. It's Aufhebender culture is what it is. This is to tear down the culture. Anything that makes somebody happy, that's what you have to tear down. So put Black Lives Matter in the frickin' Super Bowl, ruin all the commercials. Yeah. Anything that might make somebody happy, watch out. Somebody might be happy. Whoops, football. Whoops, Super Bowl. It's a super spreader event now. Super spreader bowl. Whatever might make somebody happy, might possibly make somebody be able to be content with their life.
Relax.
It's against the idea of making them revolutionary.
Yeah.
The discontented are revolutionaries. The contented are not revolutionary. They're content with the so-called status quo. They don't want the boat rocked that far. But the thing is this is a mistake. In a liberal society, the status quo is always moving already.
Yeah.
The moral arc of the universe in a genuinely liberal society does bend toward justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we see problems and we try to fix problems. And when we see bad attempts at solutions to problems, we fix the bad attempted solutions and find better ones.
Yeah.
There's actually a ratchet to liberal societies toward progress in a meaningful and real sense, because nobody wants bad stuff. And so bad stuff has the opportunity to be cleaned up because you don't have one of the two kind of big failure points, one of which is like Chernobyl, where something's going wrong and nobody has the nerve to say something's going wrong because they're going to get blitzed for it. And the other is that you're using just bad corrupted theory and grifting off of it rather than trying to get right answers about the world. Liberalism actually kind of eschews both of those things. You can't have the so-called bad emperor, as they say in the bad emperor problem in China. You can't have a bad emperor if there is no particular authority. Foucault said we have to worry about who's authenticated to say the truth. There's a power dynamic there. Well, in actual full-blown principled liberal views, the way that Jonathan Rauch describes liberal science in Kindly Inquisitors, there is no person in particular. Nobody in particular is authenticated to say truth. Nobody in particular. The
But that leaves open the
process
possibility of a consensus
is designed.
reality.
Well, the consensus in an open liberal marketplace of ideas consensus can always be disrupted by the kid pointing out that the emperor has no clothes.
Or the vaccine
What you
doesn't
have
work,
when you
or
have
the earth is
totalitarians
flat.
is people shooting at that kid.
Okay.
Say what?
It's how we treat the dissident. It's how we treat the anti-vaxxer, let's say.
Sure. Yeah.
Not the fact that we allow the anti-vaxxer, or that there will always be people who refuse the vaccine or refuse any vaccine. It's how we treat them in a liberal society.
Yes, you should be. So the essence of anti-totalitarianism is this. It's very simple. The state has absolutely no business telling you what's going on in your own head and in your own conscience. That's it. That is the essence of anti-totalitarianism. The state has no business telling you what it is that you can think, what it is that you have to believe, and therefore the extension of that in practical reality is what you can say and not say. And then there are other safeguarded rights. For example, we have a Bill of Rights, that enshrined a few of those. Like they can't just take your stuff. That's a good one, for no reason. But at the very, very bottom, anti-totalitarianism is that the state has no claim upon your conscience. Absolutely none. And so that gives you a very simple litmus test also. When is something behaving in a totalitarian way? Is it absolutely crushing down on the dissident? Is it absolutely crushing down on, or telling you in particular, especially when they go to the point where there has to be positive affirmation of some compelled speech, you're off the rails. You're off the rails.
And it's
so the dissident should be able to speak up. Kaepernick should have, I've said this before, Kaepernick should have been able to kneel in front of millions of people to protest the country by protesting the national anthem if he wants. If he wants. There's nothing wrong with the particular protest or even the form of protest. I disagree with the protest. I disagree with the form of the protest, and I think he did it for the wrong reasons. But his right to do it should be protected. But the right to tell him that he sucks for it also gets to be protected. The right to say you're being disrespectful to something super important has to be protected. The right to say, I respect your protest. I respect even the method in which you protested. And I think you're protesting for a stupid made-up reason that's not even real. Has to be protected.
And not being compelled to protest along with him once the ratchet turns where everybody has to be kneeling.
Absolutely. If somebody, and I'm not saying there should be no social costs to being a dissident. That's always going to be the case. But the thing is that the state and actors on its behalf, I think we're in an interesting situation where corporations have become de facto that, and that kind of gets around the state directly. But these huge powered interests should not have the ability to compel how you do and don't think. You should not be able to be excluded from participation in the routine activities of daily life because of your beliefs or politics.
Or threatened to be drone striked. I don't know if that's totally out of context, but some news anchor kind of really oddly suggested that that's a possibility now in the United States.
There's precedent. I think it's probably a bit extreme. There is precedent. Obama drone struck somebody who was a U.S. citizen without trial or due process. So there's the drone strike thing is actually real. And then we have Biden saying that we're going to turn the entire apparatus of the government against extremism. And it's not just enemies, foreign and domestic anymore. It's now that we have extremism. We're going to have a war on extremism. We're going to turn the full apparatus of the U.S. government against it. So it's like the precedent's there. I don't think that you're going to have conservatives getting drone struck or QAnon people or whatever getting drones. You should be able to believe QAnon if you freaking want. You should also be able to tell people who believe QAnon that, like, guys, seriously. You should be able to believe critical race theory if you want. You should. I've said for years that there in university economic departments, there should be people teaching capitalist economics. There should be people teaching socialist economics.
Mm-hmm.
There should be people teaching this stuff. And I agree with John Stuart Mill that it should be coming from people who are the best defenders. But this is why I think that asymmetry is such an important part of the subject, and where it ties back to that repressive tolerance where we kind of started our more serious aspects of our discussion. When there's a grotesque asymmetry, you have a big problem. If there's a gross asymmetry and tolerance, then you have a big problem. You can say, I say, hey, yeah, there should be a socialist teaching economics at Columbia. And the socialists are saying, get the capitalists out.
Yeah.
Fire every one of them. You have a big problem at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
That symmetry has to be respected as well. And these are the kinds of principles that we've got to figure out how to, and this is where I say this is the avant-garde, this is the front line. How do we defend these principles of equality and fairness and a truly open and free society that remains liberal, not illiberal, while having a strong enough spine that has any sense would be firing every woke person it can as fast as possible and dealing with the fallout however it has to. Infinitely better idea than keeping them on. I seriously think that. I would say you're playing with fire, but you're not. You've actually already set fire to your building if you're not doing that. It's a matter of how do you put the fire out before it becomes a unstoppable blaze.
Yeah. I see these emails floating around my job where, I know what's behind them, little critical theory things.
John Anderson's popped in.
You don't know how it's going to go far. John Anderson?
John Anderson.
The John
Hello,
Anderson?
John Anderson. I think it's the John Anderson. I don't know. It has a check mark by it.
I don't see the check mark.
Big, right? What is a check mark? John Anderson, great. Check mark. Is that like verified real John Anderson?
Yeah, once you get 100,000 subs, you get to be verified.
Oh, he's the real John Anderson.
He says, James, you recently tweeted that there is no hope in winning against postmodernism, wokeism in the West. Surely the situation isn't so bleak. Doesn't the bulk of the public still exercise common sense?
I think so the situation's very bleak. It's not totally bleak. It depends very much on whether or not I've thought a lot since I tweeted that, because I did tweet that in some frustration that people ask me all the time, what can we do? What can we do? The answer is that if we don't have steeled spines, we can't do anything. The public does largely, like my wonderful mother and her skepticism of Dr. Fauci, does still exercise common sense. A very large contingent in the public does not, however. And a lot of the public is actually not paying attention to the problem. And so how do I phrase this? I did a talk in 2019 in October in London. I did this talk and I said that essentially the thesis is that if you think of the woke ideology, it's like the critical social justice. It's like they have a really nice picture on the outside of the box. And when you open up the box, it's ugly what's inside. And far too many people still are taking the product at face value according to what's on the outside of the box. So unless there's more willingness to be aware and more willingness to steel your spine and say no to these people who are actually doing extortion, mostly through public relations threats, then it's a bleak situation. It's a very bleak situation. And I am skeptical that such a thing will turn around quickly enough, though I am being impressed with how quickly people are cottoning on to the problem. So that's part of the answer. The other part is, as far as how bleak it is, I use the analogy to the building being on fire pretty seriously. If your home or some other building catches on fire, there is a point at which it is now futile for you to come in. There are different points. One point, it's futile for you to be able to stop there from being significant damage, but you might be able to put the fire out if you have a good enough fire extinguisher. At some point, it then passes from there where you have no hope of stopping the fire yourself, and the fire department will have to come to stop the fire. Yeah. And at some point beyond that, the fire department can't save it either. It's only minimizing the risk to other structures or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so there are these kind of phases. We are in the phase where if you think of it like your kitchen has caught fire, We have left the phase where we could get the fire extinguisher, throw the lid on the thing or whatever, and stop there being damage. The kitchen is going to be damaged, is going to be wrecked. I don't think we've hit the stage yet where the fire is so bad that we can't stop it. That's your steel-spined liberalism. If we can awaken a steel-spined liberalism that's aware, maybe we can get away with some minor damage to the building, but we're not getting out unscathed. That's where in that same tweet, I said, our choices are no longer having nothing happen. I said our choices are we in Russia, or are we in Hungary, or are we in the Czech Republic, talking about the different attempted revolutions. The Hungarian Revolution in 1919 that we started talking about earlier in the conversation fell apart after something like 9 months or something. So maybe we have a few months of bad times that aren't all that bad, and we can reverse course. But there's going to be a little bit of damage. Our institutions, New York Times isn't getting out of this without some damage.
No, yeah.
That institution's damaged. Our trust in mainstream media is wrecked.
Yeah.
Places like our universities are damaged. Harvard's reputation is not as good as Harvard thinks its reputation is. Yeah. I have conservative leaders email me all the time asking me, how do we get out of this while rehabilitating? Like, I graduated from Harvard. How do I save the value of my degree? And I'm like, you don't.
Yeah.
You actually, the university system is damaged. Our school systems are damaged, at least in the United States. I can't speak for Australia. So we're not getting out of this without damage. So this is no longer a pot on the stove that caught fire that we can throw the lid on and baking soda and spray with the fire extinguisher and we're okay. And maybe there's a little bit of smoke in that. No, things have caught on fire. We can still put it out from within, but the fire builds fast. It builds fast from here. And if it goes to the next stage, we just have to run. And society is going to suffer severe consequences. And maybe there's a fire department. Maybe something can step in. I don't know if it's the military. I don't know what it is. Maybe there's something bigger that can step in. Maybe it's France, given. Maybe it's France can step in, and Poland, and put out the fire. And at some point, though, it's a conflagration. And there's nothing you can do but try to maintain safety and prevent other things from catching on fire. I think we are past that. If you look at those 4 stages, I think we are outside of stage 1 and into stage 2. Damage is already done and not undoable.
Well, I'm thinking, so the education institutions, the institutions of the media, for sure, and numerous corporations. I think once the federal government catches on fire, is that when the house is
it's hard to say. It's hard to say because yes, I mean, if the federal government's on fire, which it is, the options seem much more limited, but the options are not zero, right? It depends. Like, we have states, South Dakota, for example, right now is basically trying to pass a law. Florida's trying to pass a law like, we're not following your executive orders. States' rights, 10th Amendment. Okay. So it is possible that there could still be enough pushback against what the federal government's doing to where the damage is minimal. But it's like I said, the New York Times isn't getting out of this without damage. CNN's not getting out of this without damage. Harvard isn't getting out of this without damage. Well, guess what? Neither is the federal apparatus. The federal apparatus is now, for a very large number of people, seen as willingly participating in this and encouraging it. And that's its own problem. The fire has spread there as well. And you can think of it like different rooms, if you want, for the fire analogy of the structure have caught, the curtains are on fire in that room now. I still think that it's possible that whether it's through state action, whether it's through individual action, people pushing back on their school boards at the local level, for example, that there maybe we'll see how far gone the courts are soon. That it's possible to push back, and maybe we don't lose everything. But I think we have entered into the phase of this is already a revolution in progress, and it might fail. It's just a question of how much damage it's going to do before it's failed. And the answer is already some, not zero. Institutional reputational damage and trust in institutions has massively plummeted. And if the thing falls apart, it will massively plummet as a result for a larger number of people.
I think that there's a contingent of a massive power base of well-meaning liberal, probably boomers and Gen Xers who are just not aware that they're the ones who need to wake up. They're the ones who need to be seen that this is a fire, this doesn't work, this is how it operates. And their apparatus of meaning making, being CNN, being the New York Times, they need to fail really hard before those people wake up. There needs to be these issues that like slip through the cracks of that false reality that's keeping that power base in check, basically.
Right. I think the places that have to start, though, the most amenable are corporations. Corporations are going to be the easiest to move. And my advice for anybody who's a business leader in the world right now is very simple. Treat wokeness as though your business is a dry forest and wokeness is little fires. And if there are people who are routinely setting fires, let that guide how you would deal with those people. That's it. What would you do if you were in a dry forest and there are little fires? You would stamp them all out. I don't think you have to fire a single person. You don't necessarily. It's like, no, we're not going to do that in our company. And if you are absolutely committed to doing this in the company, there are different exit strategies. One of which that I've heard can work is that you create a severance deal and say, go ahead and leave and we'll pay you to stay out. Another one that minimizes some legal risk. Another one is that, and if you don't, we'll fire you. Another one is that you can do performance reviews. Turns out that the woke people usually stick out like a sore thumb on performance reviews in a particular way that justifies their firing.
They're really good at clanging pots, but not so good at doing dishes. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Yeah. And so there are ways to justify. Every corporate person that I've talked to has said, oh, we know who they are. Like, we can give you a list of the people who are causing the problems. And like I've said in a few different things now, it's usually not that many people. There are not that many cultural arsonists going on here. There are not that many.
Yeah, but when Disney follows their lead, then it doesn't matter how few there are.
That's the thing. They're very loud, they're very influential, and they have friends in high places. That's the difficult part. But Disney, being a corporation, is going. If Disney just tanks its like, what did they say? What was the number on the Super Bowl? It was like the least viewed Super Bowl ever, and the ratings drop was just like unbelievable.
Really,
I forgot what it was. Like 10 million fewer viewers. I mean, just huge.
Can they tie that to one thing, one vector?
I'm sure that it was something to do with white supremacy is probably why, but the real reason is more than likely woke commercials.
You know, did you see that Bruce Springsteen commercial?
I didn't see anything.
Okay, you didn't see anything. It was really interesting because it was a bunch of Bruce Springsteen, like nice American, good cheery thoughts. Well, really deep thoughts about, what is America and building up the concept of America. And at the end of this commercial, there's music and shots of the heartland. And at the end of it, he said, it's time to reunite. And it ruined the commercial for me because all I see in that word unite is obey now. So they've ruined my ability to have harmony with the rest of my country because the rhetoric is soiled. The rhetoric of the United States is soiled now. You can
unsoil the rhetoric on one condition only. The symmetry is restored. Okay. It cannot be, you cannot possibly fix, you cannot have unity until symmetry is in place. It's not possible. Yeah. Otherwise, these theories that we're talking about here and there are correct. You can't, domination and oppression don't unite. The call for unity from a position of dominance that doesn't seem to be asking or implying anything like symmetry is just a call for further dominance. And that's what you're perceiving. And people are intuiting that correctly. And the theories aren't wrong about that. They're just wrong about who the dominant people are. The woke are completely dominant right now. They're absolutely completely dominant right now. So when they call for unity, they're not calling for genuine unity because they're not willing to restore the symmetry first. That's why the asymmetry is the story right now.
What I'm saying is that even every call for unity is now suspect. They soiled the whole thing for me. Like, that's the problem, right? Yeah. Trust. Yeah.
Trust, hard to build, easy to lose.
Yeah.
And they have lost that, right? So you see manipulations of words. So what would actually have to happen is before you're going to trust the idea for a call for unity, you're going to have to see symmetry restored, and you're going to have to start seeing very good faith concessions being made over enough time to restore your trust. And then you might believe their call for unity. Mm-hmm. But they're doing literally exactly the opposite thing. Yeah, Andrew says repressive unity. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's what's happening. I think I put that on Twitter too. Repressive unity. That's the thing. So you're going to have this. The symmetry is going to have to be restored, and then trust has to be restored. Symmetry, then trust. That's the only way. And then they can say, let's talk about unity.
Let's talk about unity. Let's talk about you and me.
See, with these people, like, I hate to say this way, but these Democrats, and I mean it, the Democrats, because they're so into freaking focus groups. You can look at Hillary Clinton, you can look at Kamala Harris, and you're like, oh, he's picking the women. No, Joe Biden too. Lots of I don't pay attention to enough of them. They think they can manufacture cool. You can't manufacture cool.
You can turn it into cringe.
That's what you end up manufacturing instead. Thank you for saying it, Benjamin. You manufacture cringe instead.
Oh man.
The attempt to manufacture cool just creates cringe.
Freedom.
And that's what their stupid videos do, one after another after. Did you see the photo shoot, the GQ photo shoot with Biden?
Was that real?
In chief? There's some Photoshop involved, I'm thinking.
Okay, yeah, there's some Photoshop, but yeah, that was pretty cheese.
The photographer, I think, put the pictures on. If I said it wasn't real, and then somebody said that it's actually on the photographer's website, and that there was shop involved, but the pictures were real. Huh. I don't know. Somebody said that. It could be fake news. You never know.
Yeah.
But it's like they're trying way too hard to force this stuff. Like these like weird narratives they're weaving around like Kamala. It's like,
oh yeah,
gross.
The LA Times, they have like this altar, this Instagram altar to Kamala or Kamala.
It's no good.
It's so
you
weird.
cannot manufacture that stuff. And
if you want to go the way of China, you can do it.
No, they can't do it either. They all know. They just pretend they don't know because they don't want to die. No, like Hillary lost in 2016 for significantly because she didn't understand that you can't manufacture people liking you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can't shame them for disliking you. That's what turned me off to her campaign. The astroturfing, and then if you criticize her at all, you're an evil, sexist pig. You're like, okay, well, I'm not on board that train. You lost me. Screw you.
Yep.
Screw you.
I see another Jew in the comments has thanked me, and then somebody called you Ben. It's Benjamin.
Oh, they always call me Ben. They don't have time.
Benjamin.
They don't have time.
It's like that's his reggae name. He adds an M. Benjamin.
At least I'm down with OPP.
Yeah, you would be.
You know me. So we should wrap this up. It's going on 3 hours. I have a bladder that's older than yours, unless you want to take a break and come back.
No, it's good. We should wind it. I don't know where we actually went. You want me to play with my sword some more? Is that what we're gonna
totally.
Do? Is this a tube episode?
Let's tube in on the sword. I don't know what to do. I'll vape while you tube.
Like I can play it like a bass or something.
Did you learn anything from Glenn Lowry? Congrats on getting on his channel. I keep on trying to get him on, but it's hard.
I mean, I learned something from everybody I talked to. I really like talking to Glenn. Glenn, that was a wonderful conversation. The thing is, as far as like, did I learn something like profound? I think that Glenn and I agree far more than we disagree on most things. Yeah. So there wasn't, in that sense, like the challenging my thinking.
Yeah. Okay.
Where you see the real friction, I guess, where learning comes in. But of course, he would help me refine the view that I have around some of these issues. But I mean, I thought he was really going to hold me to the fire about Trump, but he actually mostly wanted to talk about postmodernism, which, being an economist, he doesn't need to know. And this therefore said that he doesn't know a lot about. No, that was a wonderful conversation. I did learn some things about human nature thanks to that conversation because he invited me. So the story goes, he tweeted mea culpa about Trump. I quote tweeted him with bummer. He said, come talk to me on the show. I said, okay. And I emailed him. He gave me his email address. I emailed him. We set it up. Took some finagling with our schedules. We finally got it. We did it. And I got done with it, and I go on Twitter and kind of like poking at Ben Shapiro and kind of poking at all these people like, Glenn's going to teach James a lesson. Glenn's going to put James in his place. Glenn's finally going to bring James back to sanity, blah, 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 all this stuff. And so I got off the call with him and immediately went on Twitter and said, I just had a great conversation with Glenn Loury. And he, all caps, destroyed me. And I got like worried messages and stuff like, please tell me you're okay. And it's like all these other people, though, were like, they ran with it. Like they didn't know I was making fun of the people who thought. I was like, oh, my God. And they ran with it. And I'm not saying that about the people who sent me notes. I'm saying that about like the people, as we sometimes refer to them here at the Hacienda, we call them the usual suspects. Mm-hmm. The freaking usual suspects are like, Glenn destroyed James. And it's like, oh, my God. And so then it actually came out, and it was a wonderful conversation. Pieces started to leak, and we actually had a great thing, and the whole thing. And it was like, jokes on you guys. And they were like, James is harassing a black man to make him talk to him. It's like, yeah, no shit. And it's like that's how I roll, or like that's how Glenn would roll. Like Glenn can't be harassed. Look at Glenn. He's a badass. He can't harass Glenn into talking to you.
He's a prophet. He's the anti-Kendi. He's like a total opposite.
I did, however, stare. He was wearing a shirt that said White Mountains, and I just like, don't make the comment. Don't make the comment. You can't do that anymore, man.
Did you show up with your mug?
I almost did. I need to think of like a James variant on that, and then market that. On
you need merch.
A giant cup,
I don't know why you don't have merch.
A giant cup of Shut the James Up or something like that. Yeah. But I don't want that message in the world. I don't want Shut the James Up.
Yeah. It'll haunt you.
Yeah.
You have to be careful about messaging. You have to be careful, James. Any other big lessons that you learned this month?
Whoa, I hit the microphone. I hope that wasn't bad.
No, I didn't hear it.
From what?
I don't know.
Not hit anything with it. Okay. Yeah, it's 5 feet change long. It's difficult to manipulate in a small room and change. I don't know. What other lessons do we need? Do we need like a message of hope for the hentai before we leave? I'm not supposed to use Latinx phrases, I know.
Wait,
but,
hope for hentai? Is this a plug for your...
No,
do you have a new comic book coming out, James?
No. Esperanza para la gente.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe it's poor. I don't know. That's right, Melina.
Okay, here we go. Let's put this on the screen.
What are we doing?
They don't mind that we're dicking around. I'm putting Melina's little message around.
Yeah, she's great. She's great.
They're great. There are a lot of great people in the world. I think that there's so many great people. I think we're doing really good work. I think everybody involved in this is doing really good work.
John Brown, it is spelled hodl. The line, we're going to hodl.
Hodl.
Is that where you hodl?
Hodl.
Hodl. Dogecoin to the moon. No, that's what we need to do is conceptual coin. That's the message for hope. Conceptual coin.
When are you going to get Elon Musk on your channel?
Elon tweeted. Elon's so wrong. He is so wrong. He tweeted that the most unlikely thing is the thing that will happen or something like that. And I was like, you making your mom joke at me would be very unlikely. I'm just saying. Yeah. Didn't do it.
No.
Didn't happen.
And then what happened? His rocket blew up.
Nothing.
His phallic object got stuck on the pad.
Then he got stuck on stupid Dogecoin.
And then he bought a bunch of Bitcoin, like 1.5 billion.
Well, that's good for people who have Bitcoin, I guess.
I guess I should have had that. James coin. Boyce coin.
See, no, it's got to be conceptual coin, I think. I think that's the right one. And it'll be man spreading with a $sign in the groin.
There's just too many syllables in conceptual coin. How about con coin?
No, that's definitely negative.
Okay.
That's got a negative connotation.
I was going to put all the beautiful women marveling at you on the screen.
Oh, I want to see the screen.
We may.
I don't see this happening.
Well, there's lag.
Oh yeah, look at this. I love this. And I've got your face.
This is it. Here we go. DJ Crazy Arms did it. Groin coin.
Groin coin. Groin coin.
Griff coin.
You know what my shirt says? That's a message of hope.
100 kilos net weight.
Yeah, but if we go up further, do you know what it says?
Knoxville. Cockstar.
Knoxville Cockstars. That's right. Wow. It says Knoxville Cockstars on it. I have one that you can actually read, but I try to stay low key in this really comfortable gray one. It does say Knoxville Cockstars on it, though.
So let's plug your website, New Discourses. You have subscriber only podcasts where you breathe heavily into a microphone and talk.
I also swallow.
Oh,
because my mouth has too much liquid in it.
Oh yeah, you have to mitigate the smacks.
I don't know how to do that.
You got to work on it. Get the smacks out of there.
I won't.
Get the smacks out of there. Any other dates you and Megan Kelly are going to hang out?
She said that she would get back to me, so I don't know. I hope so. I really want to talk to her. Big fan of her and her message, so I'm really looking forward to that. Last time I was on here, I told you I talked to Eva Lovia, aka Candace.
Wait, you spoke to her?
Everybody should check her channel out. Yeah, I was on there. I can show you the link. I can send you. Everybody should go check out her podcast. She's actually doing good work.
Oh, I looked into her after I saw you went on there. I was going to have her on. She's only got a couple thousand subscribers, so I was going to have her on to boost up her
she's
show.
Cool.
Well, you should help me get in contact with her.
Yeah, not everybody willing to speak up these days. You got to help people who are speaking up.
Boost.
What else have I got going on?
Boost. Boost.
Going to talk to Braver Angels soon. That's good.
Oh, great. Right? John R. Wood, excellent man.
John Wood.
Excellent
John
man.
Wood is the next
thought leader. Yeah, he's a leader.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I think he's gonna take me to task about Twitter behavior or something.
Yeah, somebody needs to do that. People want me to do that with you. I'm like, that's so boring.
I think it's a boring conversation to have in public.
It's boring.
It's a boring conversation.
James,
you tweet
be nice.
No.
Be nice.
I don't want to.
Come on. The mud that you fling gets stuck in your eye.
That's okay. It's worth it.
Okay. I don't know. You're going to get pink eye one of these days.
I've had it before. You recover.
Fart coin. How about that?
Fart coin.
We'll burst that bubble.
All right.
All right, James. Well, let's do it again. I'll let you know how it. Yeah, Senate coin. Okay, we get to dress
cynical
up.
Cynical coin. That's what we'll do.
I'm breaking out into the manosphere. Going to talk to a bunch of women who care about men to round out my gender issues, or my gender issue cast. That's what I got going on. Wow, we can actually see your desk, your setup.
Cool. Yeah, it's cool.
I don't know. Any jokes?
These are rainbow, but there's too much light, so you can't tell. They're the same as on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
You guys got in hot water for that. Why are you abusing the rainbow?
That we copied the gay flag, but we intentionally used a different number of stripes, so it wouldn't be that. It's 7 stripes, not 6.
Duh. Aha. And you don't have the weird triangles of brownness and pinkness encroaching on, penetrating the flag there.
You're damn right we don't.
Yeah, you don't have that. All right, James. Let's click. I'm going to click off the stream. You want to say goodbye to chat? Thanks for everybody showing up. This is a great time. 3 hours. We almost Rogained it. You guys have a good night.
The inimitable John Anderson join us in the chat. That was cool as hell.
Yeah. So anybody listening now, I'm going to go through, watch it. Sometimes my my stream cuts out, so I'm going to repost this from a better source. So hopefully everybody can get everything that they needed out of the stream. We'll talk to you guys later.
James and the Giant Sword.
James and the Giant Sword.
I hope it doesn't fall. That would be really bad.